Hey, thank you once again just for waiting. We just wanted to get a few more people in the room. We're going to go ahead and get started. I see there are 38 on the line. Just want to thank you so much for making plans to be here for this officer training. You can't hear audio right now. Can you hear me at this point? If I just get like a thumbs up,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Yes, please.
Okay. All
Yes, I
right.
can hear you.
Perfect. Perfect. So, we're going to get started. Just to let you know, this session is being recorded for training purposes. And as we go along, we will, at the end of the presentations, or at least during segments, we'll have times to pause and ask for questions. Go ahead and use the chat feature. As you can see, I've already saw that there was some comments in there. And so I'll do my best to keep checking back on that chat just to make sure that I'm addressing questions. But again, I'll probably formally have just a moment where we pause and then we can do dialogue, ask questions, get ideas from each other, just to give you an idea of how the format will be. On the screen, I have the the Bible verse that we really use in our ministry. It's the center and the focus of our ministry. In fact, I don't know if you guys can see, probably not my shirt, but around here, we are the protector of the innocent, the old, the weak, the girl, the boy, the defender. And we base that off of a scripture called from Proverbs 31, 8 through 9. And it says, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy." Something about working in child protection for this conference, coming into it, I would have never imagined um, sexual child abuse to be so prevalent in the church. In fact, now I was just at church yesterday, and someone was saying, I was with my children. I have two children, and she's saying, well, as your children get older, they'll be used to you not being there. You can have a break, you can go into the sanctuary and so forth. And I said, oh, no, 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 no. In my line of work, I see what happens in the church. And as soon as I had children and I had that understanding from what I do for work, I said, I won't leave my children. I'm committed to them. And in our churches, you have been called to this ministry and to lead this out. Let me tell you a little bit about a few cases that I've worked on in the last year. And it represents what we are seeing significantly in the churches. Um, I'll start with one where we were working with a congregation. A gentleman was a convicted sex offender. Um, he had been a leader in the church and have been very close to the youth. And one such girl he gave Bible studies to, he baptized to, she, in speaking with me, said that she loved this man. He was such a pivotal leader to her. And through time, the gentleman had started dating the girl's mother. And after that point, once this dating started, he was in the home more often. There was an evening where he came into the room and he had abused her. And there were other incidents that took place, but the mother had told her later on in life there was one day that she could hear the gentleman going into the hallway, and she could hear him pulling out his wallet and starting to wrestle for a package. And she could tell it was what you would hear from a condom wrapper. And she just said, why is this man in the hallway going towards my daughter's room and pulling out a condom? And thankfully, the mother at that point decided to end the relationship. But the abuse had already taken place. So some abuse had already taken place. Well, the girl, after a few months, actually did come forward, and she told her mother what had happened. They confronted the situation. They worked through the system that the man was convicted, and then she started working in the church and saying, you know, this is what this man has done to me. Conviction in hand. And throughout all the years, the church would disregard the conviction, her testimony, and they would continue to place him into different leadership roles. She eventually left the church because she could see that she was not being heard. They were not trying to protect her. And as an adult, she had come across this situation, just circumstantial. She met someone and they both grew up in the same area and they both had attended the same church at one time. And they're trading stories. And here's 30 years later, and all these names start coming up. And here the gentleman's name comes up again. And when you know again, this gentleman is leading. He's an elder, other positions in the church, but he's an elder of the church. He's visiting homes. He's doing all of these things. And again, she said, why is it that I have come forward? He is convicted, and yet the church continues to disregard this and put people in harm's way. Unfortunately, and I bring up this story because unfortunately, this is a scenario that I see most of the time. When we're working with these issues, the church seems to follow this pattern, and you have to ask why. Why, when there's so much information, why in this day and age, when we know so much about child abuse, do we still act in the same way? Now, I have a pathway here because that was one pathway, and that's typically what I see in a church. There's a lot of defense for the perpetrator, and there's very little that happens for the victim. If anything, the victim is made into the offender. You know, they receive punishment. But I have a road going the other direction because there is, when I look at the cases, some that stand out that didn't go that mainstream way. And that is, I'm going to give you another example. I was working on probably one of the saddest cases that I had been. There was a gentleman and he was accused of abusing a young girl for many years until she was an adult. And I'm not going to share the details of it, but what he did within the crime and how he handled it was so gruesome that this young lady fled the country to get away from her perpetrator eventually, is suicidal, very paranoid. She can't, she doesn't live a normal life whatsoever. Her trauma is her existence. Well, we met with the church, we met with a gentleman, and we just said, you know, we need to place restrictions. We're very concerned about what has come forward. And we thought that we had done our work. The conference had partnered side by side with the church and, you know, with the person, letting him know, you know, that it's just, we can't take a second chance. Well, I got a call just a little bit later, and it said, well, after you guys met with this person, he continues to be serving with the youth. He continues to still be serving in the church in the main sanctuary. And not only that, but we have a family camping trip coming up. It's a family camping trip, and he will be there. His wife will be there, and they have invited a single mother and their daughter to actually stay within their tent. And I said, oh my goodness, what's going on? And because of this prominent leader that made the call, the man was stopped. And I can just imagine the young girl that this woman saved. It was a woman that made the call, and she was a leader. She was a child protection coordinator. And the amount of work and the amount of judgment that came on this leader was significant, to the point where she wanted to resign. I can't handle this. People are coming down on me. But she took the role of child protection coordinator seriously. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. And it's because of that the children were safe in this church, because someone decided, I'm not going to keep going on the path of staying silent, of seeing this happen and making our children vulnerable. She made the decision she was going to sacrifice herself, basically, and put herself in order for the wolf to be put off from the hurt from the shepherd. And so I have these two paths, because what we have here in our ministry is that those scenarios, what path are we going to choose in our ministry? Because I tell you, we have a flock, and our ministry is to shepherd this flock. And we have to make the decision, are we going to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves? Because it's going to be the hardest work. Because I tell you, the devil is coming for the flock. I can tell you, if you are going to be active in this ministry, he will be there because the flock is there. And so I just want to leave you with that thought of how impactful your ministry can be. Are you going to be like the churches we've seen over and over and over and over in our conference? Or are you going to be that gem that stands out and said, no, I have a role. I love the children in my church. I'm taking this role on that God has called me to. Today's session, I just want to give you a little outline. And first, we're going to begin with a devotional thought from Pastor Brian Gonzalez. And he's going to be speaking on the sheep, the wolf, and the other sheep. I'm going to give you a recap of the year-end report for last year, and it'll give you an idea of some of the things that I've just kind of hinted towards. We're going to focus a lot of the day on actually predators, so I'll come back and I'll share on predators. We'll do a review on a video that was given at the End It Now Summit. It's a yearly summit in our church that focuses on domestic violence, child abuse, all these matters, and they bring in leaders in these areas to help train us. So we're going to take a look at that. And then the final thing is we're going to talk about, what does it look like, the nuts and bolts of our ministry? What does that look like if we're going to lay it out? What do I need to do? What do I need to accomplish? And what are the tools to get there? So with that, I am going to turn it over to Pastor Gonzalez, who will share the devotional thought with us. And thank you very much for being here, Brian.
Thank you, April. You're a tough act to follow, April. That was very just opens your eyes and your ears, and it just breaks your heart to hear these stories. I'm gonna share something in the same vein that April has been sharing about the good shepherd, the higher hand, the sheep, the wolf, and the other sheep. Listen, if I look a little tired, that's because I am. We've been on a party since November 17, which is April's birthday, and then November 19, my father-in-law's birthday, and December 10, my birthday, and December 18, my other daughter's birthday, and then Christmas, and then New Year's, and yesterday was Bella's birthday. So yeah, I'm ready for some reprieve before Valentine's. So if I look tired, that's where it's coming from. Listen, guys, I would like you to take you through like a general survey of scripture. And I would like to go back to the Garden of Eden. We're going to start there. And if you can go back to that special place after God created man and woman and all creation, God established how that relationship between man and nature is going to be, right? And basically, God made humankind to be the stewards of this earth, the stewards of every living thing, trees, plants, animals, and other people to come forward. And then the nature of God's relationship with us stands apart with the rest of creation. We're not just inhabitants here, but we are these designated stewards, and God has empowered us, but not with unchecked authority, to take care of the sacred duty. And what's our role? To protect everything, every tree, every plant, every creature, every human beings, no exception, right? So, because if we create, we have this role of protectors, of stewards, our role will be to make things thrive, to make things better. So, for everything around. And what happened is that we failed. Pardon the interruption, the kids. So we have given this role, right, to be to tend to the earth and other humans, and we failed immediately, right? And then you see God designating the angels to protect that the Garden of Eden, but in the promise is about restoration, right? About, if you look throughout the whole vein of Scripture, the promise is moving from what it was to, let's go back to that what it was. And at the end of Scripture, we see in the plan of redemption, we see earth recreated, we see the reestablishment of the Garden of Eden, we see the reestablishment of the order that God had created, right? So if we explore a couple of texts in Scripture, we're gonna see that that pattern all throughout the Old Testament. God's plan is to restore humanity to its original state. And what happens? Time and time again, after God is giving us and telling us to do this, you see the stories in Scripture how we fail our fellow human beings. Even though we are the designated stewards God has called us to take care, we fail our fellow human beings. And this pattern is repeated story after story after story in the Old Testament. And as you move into the New Testament, right, and we're going to see a couple of verses in a minute just to kind of reinforce the thought here. But as we move into the New Testament, we understand and we know that Christ came down to earth in the moment that earth was in its darkest time, where actually everybody was living for their own, where in fact the religious establishment that was designed as that space where it was to protect the people, those who cannot speak for themselves, those who are needy, those who are destitute. The religious establishment is failing the people. Here are the verses. Just a little pause going back, in Deuteronomy 32. The rock, his work is perfect, for all his ways are justice. God, a God of faithfulness and without iniquity, just and upright is he. So justice is always in the radar of God. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne. In Psalms, in Proverbs, we read that we need to speak up for those who can't speak up for themselves. In Isaiah, we learn that we need to do good and to seek justice. This theme is prevalent throughout Scripture. In fact, in the Old Testament, if you study, God has judgment for all the nations around Israel. But the harshest judgments in the Old Testament, if you read, is against the leadership of Israel because they have failed to do justice. So now we are in the New Testament, and the religious establishment, even after the exile, they try to reform things around. They failed. Jesus comes, and in this state of failure of the religious establishment, and we see that the message is consistent. In Matthew 18, if anybody causes one of these little ones to fall, it will be better for them to put a large stone, a millstone, which is pretty heavy and large, on their neck and just go down into the depths of the sea. God is serious about justice to those who cannot protect themselves. And I want to illustrate this because even us as called to be the religious establishment today, we have failed as well, but we don't have to stay there. And I would like us to go to John chapter 10. And this is in the context of the Good Shepherd, the story, Jesus comparing himself to the Good Shepherd. And the first 6 verses is like, I am the Good Shepherd. And it ends up with like the people who are hearing him, the religious establishment saying, huh? They were confused. Like, what are you talking about? You're a good shepherd, right? And then we'll pick it up on verse 7. And Jesus said again, so he is establishing again what he is saying. He just paraphrasing it in a different way. And it says, very verily I tell you, I am the gate for the sheep. So now he's not only the good shepherd, he is comparing himself to the gate, the one who lets people in and out. And all those who have come before me are thieves and robbers, and the sheep have not listened to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come and go out and find pasture. And by the way, the picture of pasture here, I hope that the first thing that you hear in your mind is Psalm 23, where he will lie you down in green pastures to rest. It's a picture of peace, a state of peace of mind. You're just grazing to your heart's content, right? But listen what it says, verse 7. The thief comes only to steal, to kill, and to destroy. 3 things: steal, kill, and destroy. But I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. And then he goes back to the good shepherd image, right? I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays his life down for the sheep. Now, when you to pay attention to this, Jesus is speaking about himself. And now look at what he says. The hired hand is not the shepherd and does not own the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. And then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. And the man turns away because he is a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. And he comes back to saying, I am the good shepherd, reiterating the same point. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father. I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen, and I must bring them also in. I want us to realize here that God is pointing out basically 3 people groups. God himself, Jesus, as the good shepherd, as the gate. That's the imagery for God. And there's sheep that are inside, and there's sheep that are outside. And then there's this other group, which is the same, just augmented: the thieves, the robbers, and the wolves. And notice that the wolves are a separate people group. This triune description of this group, the thieves and the robbers and the wolves, it's all the same. And this is one people group, and they exist in the church. They come into the church to steal, to kill, to destroy, to scatter. Notice that God or Jesus is not calling the wolves sheep. A wolf is a wolf is a wolf. A wolf is not a sheep. And we need to keep this in mind because sometimes we treat the wolves like sheep. Can a leopard change his spots? Today, you're going to revisit some research that says that I forgot the number, but these wolves don't change. Now, can a wolf be saved? That's by God's miracles that a wolf can be saved, but a wolf is not a sheep. It's still a wolf. And I want us to please just let that marinate in our head. The worst scenarios that are here are those of people in the church, leadership in the church, that are set out to protect the wolf. But that's not God's justice. In God's justice, we are called to protect the sheep who cannot speak for themselves, who cannot stand up for themselves, and they need someone, and that is you, to stand up for them. Now, there's another group here, and it's the hired hand. And here in this parable, in this narrative, when Jesus is speaking to the religious establishment, he is talking to them as the hired hand. From the beginning, from Eden, the stewards are the hired hand. The stewards of the earth are this hired hand. When we go to the end of time and this earth is remade, they are going to be, we are going to be the hired hand again. We're going to be stewards of this earth. Our role does not change. But here in the middle of a story, in the darkest time of history, in Jesus' time, before he reveals himself and becomes light, the hired hand, when they see the robbers and the thieves and the wolves coming to kill, to destroy, and to steal, the hired hand will take off. The stewards, the managers will take off. The people who the sheep were entrusted to, they will take off and let the sheep on their own. That's not my problem. I don't have to deal with that. That's not my calling. And yet, that's what they were hired to do. And because their relationship is so distant to the sheep, they don't have a personal relationship with the sheep. They don't own the sheep. They don't care for the sheep. And the question is, are we going to be that hired hand described in this text? Or are we going to be the hired hand that God has called us from the garden all the way to the restoration of the new earth? Are we going to be collaborators or co-laborers with God in building the kingdom that is based on his justice and his righteousness and his love? That's the story I want to put in front of you today. This is not light work. This is not an extra ministry. This is not a new venture for the conference. This is our calling. We've been called to steward those who cannot fend for themselves. What will your role be? That's my question for today.
Thank you, Pastor Brian. I appreciate you bringing us that word because, quite often what's sad to me is, and I see it case by case, is we are usually thrown scripture against justice. And we forget that that is a whole characteristic of God, and we would want it to be. As a victim, we want a God of justice. But there's a lot of things that happen with the predator, and we're going to get into that. And they like to use scripture against us, and they like to use grace and mercy and forgiveness but they forget that there is a side of justice that is included in all of this. So I really appreciate you pointing this out, and especially just giving us grounding and encouragement on our call. And we have a great work that is here for us. So thank you so much for just bringing our minds here in scripture and giving us what Jesus has done, and that he's our example as we lead out in this ministry for our children. All right, before we get to the next section, I'm going to quickly check the chat. And see, we had a few thoughts. Well said. Amen. So, Brian, thanks so much. And yeah, as you get to hear, we've not only been partying, but we have been sick since Christmas. So, appreciate that you just gave that effort here for us. So, as I said, each year, what we'd like to do is kind of have an overview of how the year went, and where we would like to go a little bit in the future. This conference administration has been very heavy on something called KPI, which is key performance indicators. And so in each of our ministries, we try to set a goal, a short-term goal and a long-term goal. And then, we look back at the end of the year and say, hey, did we meet these goals? What are we seeing in our ministries where we need to go next? So in 2024, at the end, we gave year-end reports to the executive committee. I want to share here, it's only a 5-minute video. I want to share what that was for our ministry in 2024, and it'll give you a good picture, and then we'll go from there. So I'm going to play that now.
The Southern New England Conference is committed to providing safe worship and educational environments. Our organization follows the safety guidelines set forth by the North American Division. The Child Protection Department supports this initiative by promoting, training, and establishing these preventative measures to keep kids safe in our churches. When a child abuse matter takes place in our church, our department works with parties involved in conjunction with local state agencies, Adventist Risk Management, and legal teams. Let me introduce you to our team. Pastor Edgardo Herrera is the Executive Secretary and Child Protection Committee Chair. I'm the Child Protection Coordinator. We are grateful to work with the Child Protection Committee, who provide a great wealth of knowledge and direction. Currently, there are 167 local coordinators representing 136 churches. The work they do is integral to the protection of our children. A few months ago, an email came in describing an abuse incident that took place at a church. The person shared their experience and closed with, "I'm thinking I might have to leave my church so I can feel safe." Have you considered the question, how safe is church? Child abuse is as common or more prevalent in the Seventh-day Adventist Church as it is in the general population. Too often, a call comes in from a victim or their family asking why our churches were the cause of devastating hurt. The missteps are usually repeated of what went wrong. Our churches let one adult alone with children. There were places in the building where monitoring was poor. Children were not supervised. Volunteers were allowed to work without being a member, or they were brand new, and training and background screening was disregarded. In 2024, there were over 12 incidents of child abuse worked on by the Child Protection Committee. As you can see, when we began working with offenders, they were serving in all areas of the church. This reinforces that churches need to ensure all volunteers, not just youth volunteers, follow the safety protocols. Prevention measures are key to creating safe places. Child protection training and screening are important in our framework to prevent abuse. In reviewing the current year, the Southern New England Conference placed 8th in overall utilization of the Adventist Screening Verification Program in the NAD. In addition, our conference remains as a leader in the NAD in Adventist Screening Verification activity when factoring in membership. In looking at the trend for Adventist screening verification activity, since launch, there have been good growth periods, except during the pandemic. More activity will continue to be added as we close the year. One positive factor supporting this activity has been the integration of the program into the Adventure and Pathfinder Club application process, with great support from the youth team. A measure to assess the Adventist screening verification program is to verify the number of volunteers to the number that are compliant within the program. In eAdventist, there are currently 2,727 officers listed. There are currently 3,704 accounts that are compliant in Adventist screening verification. There have been a number of achievements made during the year, which include the number of registered local child protection coordinators, representing 136 congregations, which is a slight increase over last year. Child protection training in English, French, Portuguese, and Spanish is now available to volunteers, as well as customer service to support these languages. Integration of volunteer referencing in Adventist verification has been made, eliminating the paperwork once required volunteers. And at camp meeting, we began an online check-in, check-out program. 11 of the 15 KPIs set for this year were achieved. Next year, there are a number of opportunities our department will begin working on. 2 of them include to coordinate and provide financial resources to further educate congregations and groups on expansion of child protection topics, including human trafficking, child abduction, pornography, and domestic violence. In addition, we'd like to research, gather, and share a network of child advocacy and domestic violence organizations that provide services that members in each state, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island, can utilize. We are all called to serve in the child protection ministry. Proverbs 31, 8-9 says, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Defend the rights of all those who have nothing. Speak up and judge fairly, and defend the rights of the poor and needy." In our department, we strive to do that, and we thank you for your role and your help in keeping kids safe.
Well, thank you so much for just watching that again. I was sharing with you that at the end of the year, we like to recap and see where we've been. As you can see, there's quite a few matters that our team had to actively engage in, and this is on top of just regular training. There was a focus on trying to work with church boards and train church boards, because there's the leaders, and from the leaders, it can trickle into churches. So that was kind of a regular focus on training. And then just actually getting into the scenarios. And once something does take place, it's very difficult for our church. And so we like to show as much support and walk hand in hand in the matters. So we've been quite busy and just trying to, meet with the boards, meet with elder teams, pastors, as things have come up. And so you saw the highlight that we've worked over with 12 matters over the course of this year, and, all with different things, whether abuse is taking place over Zoom, whether there has been actual, engagement sexually and on the church property, at private homes, but involves church leadership somehow, and so forth. So we work hard on that. One thing that did take place is during camp meeting, I was quite surprised because I set up our booth and put out normal child protection materials that we have. For some reason, I had quite a bit of material on domestic violence, and it's not something our area really gets into. But as I was monitoring the booth and just kind of seeing the materials that were going, it wasn't really the child protection materials that were going, but I had to keep supplying materials on domestic violence. Not once or twice, that is just what steadily happened. in the English and Spanish camp meeting. And so it really helped our team just have a broader perspective. We also touched on human trafficking, at least what we thought were signs of human trafficking, of people engaging groups of children and asking for their personal information. And, so you saw some of the things for this year that we'd like to start engaging in is kind of expanding our territory just a little bit, and hit some of these topics. Next week at the Youth Leadership Training Convention, we actually have someone coming in to talk about that, human trafficking, and how it applies to our churches, how prevalent it is going to be, and what our youth leaders and leaders can do to kind of equip their churches and, talk to their youth. There'll be discussion also including pornography. So we're already starting to get going on the new goals for this year. And something I like to ask for this team is, you could see at the very end, one of the goals we'd like to do is start putting together resources that take place in each of our states. And so if there are people, I know a lot of times, the coordinator may have, I hear often like a job in social work. That's a big one, or counseling, and you've kind of gravitated towards this ministry as well, or you work with children, teachers, and so forth. So I'd love to see if there's anyone in this team that would like to help contribute to that resource, because, I'm in Massachusetts. Of course, I can do plenty of research online, but I'd love to just work with our local leaders that are in the different states on trying to put together a really good resource. So when we get to things like camp meeting, or just, some of the presentations throughout the conference, we have resources for people. Where do I turn to when, my husband is hurting me, or I'm in a relationship that's abusive, or I need help. I need the rape hotline to call and tell somebody I need help. And so if you could just put in the chat, or you can email me later and just say, hey, yes, I'm willing, I'm in Connecticut, or I'm in Rhode Island, I'm in Massachusetts, and I'd love to be a part of this project, and just collaborating and trying to get a network of resources that are available that we can share and keep updated from year to year. So that is a question out to you guys, if you can consider. And again, if you share it with me by email or chat on the chat feature, I'll know that, that's a project that we can work on together, and I'd appreciate that. All right. At this point, I'm gonna just pause, because we're gonna go into the next section of training. We haven't gotten to too much yet, but I still want to open it up if there is a question at this time, and that we can answer for you. And thank you. I think I already see someone that can help. That's great. So I appreciate that coming in. Thank you to Rhodey and Barbara and to Keisha. All right.
The Southern New England
I have a question.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, so looking at our church calendar, right? We have like youth days, we have days for women ministry, men ministry, and all that. Do we have a day on the calendar for child protection? And the follow-up question is, looking at Youth Week of Prayer, they do send us materials that we study and present to the church. So if we don't have one, can we maybe plan for something like that? And if materials for presentation on the day could be shared, so that we could all use the material to educate our church on child protection, I think that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think I'm gonna, sorry, I'm seeing the sun is coming in on me now. I'm gonna maybe move in a second, but to answer your question, yes. Actually, we're gonna be watching a presentation. It's a lengthy presentation, but it's really good. And it is a seminar that takes place every year called End It Now. And in August, they have materials that are ready-made, not only like the main sermon, but also they have breakout session materials where the PowerPoints are already done. They will usually have corresponding videos that go with it. So there is an emphasis time for our ministry where we actually engage in the churches and have all the materials that we need to have that. I think it's the second Sabbath in August, where all of our churches can commit, and all you have to do is really hit play, because all the resources. So whether you yourself want to get in front and do the sermon, or you want to just have the video that has been produced, you can do either. But they have material every single year in August for this ministry, and so there's definitely resources that will be available to you.
April, can I say something?
Sure.
The Women's Ministry Day is the fourth Sabbath in August. The NAD Women's Ministry website has a sermon for those who cannot prepare their own sermon. And they have usually seminars for the whole day and different activities to do. They usually keep the materials from previous years in their website too, and they're translated in different languages. So we have a lot of material there.
Yeah, and I think it's probably the same one because it's the women's ministry that produces it. And so some years they focus more on domestic violence. Sometimes they will focus on child abuse. And so it will always be on abuse topics. And as you said, everything is ready made for you. So yes, it is in August that we'll launch it. Usually the month before, I'll send it like a group email out to all the coordinators and just let them know, here are the materials, here are the links and so forth. So you can look for it, or also you can be waiting, around July. And if, maybe even earlier as you're planning it out, thinking of it now, just start gearing your mind towards August and trying to get on your church calendar that weekend to have those materials played. Okay.
I have a question.
Sure.
My name is Gus Lescouflair, and I want to thank Sister and Pastor Gonzalez for their presentation. I know it was very difficult presentation to make. I appreciate that very much. I am very, very concerned about this issue that we're discussing here, and I mentioned it to my church in Connecticut, and the response generally was that people are not very interested in going through the screening process or the implementation processes. And so my question is, this is a Southern New England conference. I'm trying to get a sense of how prevalent this problem is. Is it more pronounced in certain conferences, local conferences, or is it really a North American division issue, or is it worldwide? I'm trying to, because I'm hearing things that I really, I'm not sure are true. People kind of run away with things, and they're not very nice things about the Adventist Church. I'm involved in ministry quite a bit, and I don't want I would not like to hear people say that we're trying to protect predators, as certain other denominations have been known to do. And so can you give us a sense of the prevalence of this problem, Sister Gonzalez? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So unfortunately, the answer is it's probably more prevalent in our churches than it is in the general population. And the reason is whenever you have children's programming, you can just automatically know that there is going to be a predator. I mean, this morning in worship, we saw about the flock. And because the flock is there, we can expect that the wolf will come. Well, it's really no different for our churches, whether or any program with children. I mean, you think about the Boy Scouts, you think about the Catholic Church. The Adventist Church is in the same dynamics because we have VBS and adventures programs and Sabbath schools. And because we have all these wonderful programs, it also means that people are going to come and take advantage of that. And they seek our congregation because of that. So this is not an Adventist problem or a Catholic problem, or it is all of our problem. Whenever there's a group of children, schools, sports programs after school, all of these things, you're going to see that they're, it is going to be coming. You'll see families again, because the families have children. You see a lot of times, one of the number one things is to go after single parents, and you'll see abuse rates sometimes go up for step parents. And what's the connection there? Did they come in for access to the children? So whenever you have children and you have access to children, you're going to see that this is a problem. The church has been very, very, I would say over the last 10 years, has pushed to have high standards and to come back. And we're going to get into that a little bit more, but you're going to see that the Adventist church is not turning a side eye to it. We're actually, that's why we're here. We're asking that this great responsibility be pulled into your churches, because, at the conference, we certainly can't be in every single church. We absolutely need a whole network and a team. So every single congregation has an advocate working on this program with their church. The conference here is, I believe, is quite strong in the efforts that we're putting out. You'll see the different conferences, they may have a greater or lesser emphasis, but overall, we are pulling it from the North American division that has crafted, okay, what's the problem and how do we combat it? And we're going to talk about that even more. We're going to get into more details. But thank you for the question. Unfortunately, we are a target. Our churches are a target for child abuse, especially sexual child abuse. I mean, it's not that there's not a physical harm to a child, or, we might see neglect, not so much from our church, but we might see families where a child might be neglected. We just worked on a matter probably the last couple of months regarding that. But it's not what we see most often that hits our churches in terms of where our leaders are displaying abusive behaviors. It's definitely centered on the sexual part of it. So we will get into that. I'll answer your question more, because you're going to see that we're going to keep providing information on that. But I hope I gave you a little bit of a snapshot of we're not turning a blind eye. In fact, we're asking churches not to do it. And that's why we're thanking you for your time here and how we can equip you to go back into your churches from the presentation today. Right. So I had given a little bit of information earlier that sadly, there are people that want to come into our churches, take advantage of our programs, take advantage of us, and harm our children. And so one thing that came out of the assessment from last year is not that we don't have good protocols and that we haven't been trained on it, but now we have to bring our churches to the next level. How do we change a whole shift in how we view the protection of our churches when there is a problem? Responding to offenders once someone has engaged in inappropriate activity. So we're going to spend a great deal of our time talking about predators today and talking about how we respond to it and to the people. So I had kind of mentioned it just a moment ago, but it's not really a coincidence how abuse is taking place. It's not at random. Sex offenders go in and they specifically pick out certain communities, certain families, certain victims, and they are quite strategic in what they're doing. Number one, they're going to seek organizations that offer access to children. We kind of just mentioned that. They want to be in a setting where their past behavior is unknown. they want to be in a setting where people are open and trusting and friendly and tolerant and accepting. They want to be in a place where a community has loose boundaries and in a place where we may be unwilling to confront questionable behavior. And when you look at all of those description points, you can kind of see that the number one place that could describe that is our churches, which is scary because it tells us that we felt like church was supposed to be the safe place. We go in and we take our children and we drop them off and we go to the sanctuary, and then we might not see our children for the rest of the day. They might not sit with us during, the main church service, and they may not sit with us during potluck. They're all over the church, and we've placed them there because we think as soon as they walk into the building, okay, they're in a safe place. But then we're seeing the exact opposite, because predators know that they're coming, and they know that they probably may not be supervised at all times, and they can come in and have a whole group that they can now look at. And after they come into our church, they're going to assess every part of our programs. I've used this quite often, but it just explains it so well. And this was regarding an Adventist teacher that had come into interview at different schools within the North American division. And he just said it clearly in his sex therapy after his treatment when he was released. And that was, he's like, I go in and I am going to find the easiest targets that I can go into, and then I can take advantage and abuse children. And so he's going in and interviewing each of the schools. Well, that's what's taking place in our churches. As people are coming in, they are interviewing us. What are the safety protocols? Are there a good amount of children? Are the children being watched? Are the parents actually engaged with their children? They are assessing the whole time. And so it's a little bit more like this picture that you're seeing, where they are actually targeting us and specific families and specific children to see where they can get away with their crime. And if they go into a church and there's good protocols that are actually being followed, it's probably the biggest deterrent, where they say, I'm not going to stay around here because my behavior is going to be watched and looked at and assessed, and I just can't carry out what I need to. A little bit about sex offenders, what does it look like? Is it a certain gender, is it a certain ethnicity that it's more prevalent in? And what we can see is it's in both, although we do see that most of the time it's males that will, that are engaging in these crimes, or at least that are being caught. But it's in all different age groups, whether it's grandpa. I get a lot of times, well, but he's 70 years old. We don't need to worry about him. Oh, we need to worry about him. We've done quite a few 70-year-olds in this conference. And so age does not matter. It's coming if you're a teenager. It's coming if you're that 70-year-old. It's coming through all the ages where we see someone might be offending. Every race, it doesn't matter if it's an English church, a Spanish church, a Portuguese church, a Haitian church. It is coming through all of our churches. It's coming through the most educated. It is coming through someone that doesn't have a high school degree. It doesn't matter. This crime is not a respecter of these different categories. So we don't know exactly, where to pinpoint it, but we can say most of the time we would expect to see it with a male. Someone that is a sex offender will usually, on average, commit 120 to 200 separate sexual crimes before they're actually caught, which means for us that when we suspect something, it's really important that we end that behavior. And we do that by reaching out to proper authorities. And sometimes also we need to work within our churches, but always with authorities and local state agencies, where we can't risk a second crime, because we can see the number it will go to if we don't actively, end someone from having access to our children. And the average number of victims is usually 8 to 13 children. One thing that I want to point out here is we're catching fewer than 5% more than likely, even though if you were to go on to the sex offender registry for your state and plug in your address, you'd probably be very alarmed to say, oh my goodness, I have this many people working in my area and living in my area. And to think that that is really just a minute, um, a minute number to what is actually taking place. And when people do get caught, usually we only learn about, though they have 3% of the crimes they're actually committing. So it's a very underreported crime. We really don't know the scope, which makes it scary because what we do see is scary enough. Most of the time, you're going to see this come through someone that's very close. So it's going to be someone related to a child. But then as you keep going on, you're seeing, okay, now it's a friend of a parent. This is important for you guys to think of right now. Okay, so, you know, friendships that are made in church are sometimes on purpose. An offender are again going into a certain community, but they're also picking certain families, and they will create friendships on purpose with certain families. And then, of course, person in authority or youth service worker or volunteer. And so you can see how we're really high up there in terms of where we're seeing the offender relationship to a victim. And very rarely is this a stranger danger problem. This is definitely a known crime. As we can see on the screen in our church, what we can also say of the offender is they are our leaders. And so we are having incidents come in with the deacon, the elder, the adventure leader, the pastor, the teacher, the principal. You can see also another huge category is we're seeing teens offending other teens or minors offending other minors, which means that we have to have a whole different view. You know, before it was just, you know, the adult male that is offending. And now we can see, wait a second, we have a whole group of teens that are actually committing these crimes. And more than likely, when this takes place, it's because there was no supervision. Because if they were being supervised, they wouldn't be able to carry this out. So this is kind of the snapshot. We're still going an overview of what an offender looks like. And in our church, the offender is our leaders. Now, how does this work? How do they get away with all that they're doing? And the thing is, they use something called grooming, where someone builds a trusting relationship, an emotional connection. This is not something that is random or just didn't take time. Grooming is suggesting that this took time and it took relationship, which is why I was pointing out to be careful as you know you're assessing your church. People will create friendships with families on purpose. So friendship is a thing. Being a leader is a thing. So most adults don't know what to look for when we're talking about grooming. And of course, we don't want to see it. We don't want to believe it that someone could engage in that, not only to our children, but in church. Really? And we talked about this. How does it work? Predators are targeting specific children, specific families, and specific communities. It is not random. And what they will do is they will not only go after the child, but they are seducing us as well. Again, in our friendships, oh, that person is so helpful. He helped me with, you know, fill it in. And so they know that they need to get close to not only the child, they need to get close to us as well. And from the beginning, if they are engaging in this, they are already preparing if someone were to disclose or to confront them. And they're constantly learning. What can I learn? What went wrong? What can I do better? What do I need to know? And I'm going to touch on that a little bit later. Now, if we were to look at what this looks like a little bit more detailed, they're going to study and befriend. They're going to learn what a child likes, what they need. They're going to overcompliment. I mean, children want attention and they want praise. And the offender knows this and they will give it to them. So they will overcompliment. They'll act like them. So they're showing similar interests. this is one thing that is just one thing I try to be very careful for as a parent. They're going to want to get physical, and they're going to tickle, and they're going to cuddle, and they're going to kiss. And so what happens is they begin by maybe touching areas that are not offensive, and they're doing it right in front of us. But then because a child has now gotten used to someone's hands on them, then they can proceed with time to go to other areas. And then it's a slip to the buttocks, or it's a graze of a breast or something. And so a big thing for us, if you're parents on this line or just watching, the interaction in your church, is who is touching the children. I know I'm not putting my hands on another person's child. And what is happening here when I talk about that they will manipulate us and a child at the same time, they're getting us used to their hands being on our children, and our children are seeing our face, and we're not alarmed by it. We're okay with the tickling and cuddling and hugging, and it's made it all right. So our children are saying, okay, yeah, mom and dad is not upset. They're laughing too. And we have made it all okay for the touching to take place on our children. So I make it a point that I am very careful when I have any contact, side hugs, and it's, always in the presence of someone there, but I try to minimize the amount that I would even touch. And I am very aware of when someone is actually putting their hands on my child. They will erode boundaries. So, oh, hi, I walked in. I'm so sorry. I walked in on you in the bathroom, and so again, they're just inching their way in. I talked to you right now, they get physical in front of parents. So parents have seen it, and it's normal touching, and so we don't do anything about it. But if we're allowing touching, just that regular touching, we're actually allowing the process to take place. So just be very careful of, again, whose hands are on your children. Predators will use sexuals or pornography, oh, look at this. And again, they are moving very slowly. So both us and our children have no gauge that something is even taking place until it does. One thing that I'm going to point out here on the slide is sometimes, we get into the thing that because this is sexual abuse, this is something that feels terrible, would be so alarming to the child. So why wouldn't they come and tell us right away? But that's not always the case. In fact, most of the time, a sexual offender will try to engage the child to make them feel like this is a partner. They want the child to be aroused. They can get more out of it. They can go further with the child if it's not something scary to them. And so again, if the touching has taken place for so long, and then now they're on their genitalia, hey, it might even feel good, which is, it's harder for our children to come at us because again, it didn't feel icky necessarily, it felt like, oh, but 60 to 80% of offenders do not cause physical or harm or pain to our children. So we have to look at it from a different mindset that this might be going on and they are doing it in a way to satisfy our child. And so we have to have conversations that are a little bit different with our children. And it happens the first time, a child may not say anything. And by the second and third time, now the child feels, oh, I've been engaging with this person. So even if I feel like it's wrong, I've been doing it for all these times, and they're less likely to come forward and say something. Some red flags we've talked about in the previous slides. Again, the physical contact, just very preoccupied with that level of what their interests are and so forth. Even if they don't have children, they're now, coming into it, and it's just like, why are you, working in this area? You don't even have, there's nothing that really gets you here, why you should be here. You're in a Sabbath school room, but you don't have necessarily any children and so forth. And it's not to say someone can't be there that doesn't have children. I'm not going there. I'm just saying that when you add up many variables, and it just doesn't make sense why someone is engaging with children at an at a what am I trying to say, at a level beyond what would just be teaching. They're also going out with them after, and they're doing gifts, and and you add it all up, there seems to be a problem. We have red flags. So what's too good to be true? Buying gifts for no reason at all, taking children on outings, wanting to be alone with them during those outings. They want to be they want to come into our family. They're going to be in our social functions, always available to babysit, and they're always too good. They're too good with the kids, and just, it is too good to be true. Most offenders don't need to actually tell children not to say anything. An offender is usually someone the child and family are close to, like, and depend on. You think of, parent. If a parent is doing it, certainly there's added pressure. Maybe daddy is the one that is the financial breadwinner. So what if I say something, it will upset mom. And also, how will our family survive? So there's a lot on a child, that they understand the relationship to that person. Some children are afraid that they're just not going to be believed. And honestly, most often that is true. Children are afraid that someone is going to get in trouble, including themselves, or a family may break up. And as I pointed out to this, the more incidents that take place, the less likely a child will disclose. Because again, if they haven't reported the first time, and the first time they didn't even know what took place. They've had this person near them and on them for so long, and it's never been, in these private areas. And then all of a sudden it is, they may not say anything. And then the second time it happens, oh my goodness, well, I've allowed it one time and two times. Why would I disclose now? There's so much pressure on children, but this is not an area of responsibility that a child should hold. This is for us to be looking, and for us to see what's taking place. What we do know is that only 2 to 5% of child abuse allegations are false. And so a lot of times in our work, we always have the question, well, you just go on what a victim says? And our answer is yes, because we can see through research, not just something that on our own, that if someone are to come forward and bring forth an allegation, we will believe it. We will take the chance that we're the 2% chance or the 5% chance that it may be inaccurate, because we've just seen through research that most of the time it is true. All right. How do offenders avoid to get reported? Something that we have to really keep in mind in our churches is sex offenders' life and freedom depends on covering up their crimes. And if we always have that in our mind, then we can help our churches, because as I said in Brian's worship, a lot of the times one of the first offenses that we will get right away is just a complete manipulation on the biblical standard that we are held accountable to. There is rebuke, and then from rebuke there is things that naturally take place when something has happened, and you see the fruits of someone. But almost all the time, I get the number one question, well, our churches should be a place for everyone. And because churches should be a place for everyone, it needs to be a place for the sex offender. And how dare I judge the sex offender? And they completely manipulate. That's one of the tactics they use. They completely manipulate our standards. And so we have to realize they are going to use every argument in the book, including bringing in the Bible and texts on forgiveness. And we just have to be ready for that. So these are actual quotes for people that have come forward and have shared what they have said to avoid getting caught. I said it was an accident, a mistake, or the first time something like this has ever happened. I told them I felt terrible about it and would be willing to go to therapy. I told them that it would ruin my life, my family, my career if they reported me. I told them it was the child's fault. I told them I'd been molested as a child. That's actually not true. That is used as one of the excuses. I've even heard it in the last month. I've heard that in a combination with a few of these as I was working with a sex offender. And he tried to use that sympathy point that he himself had been molested. Now, it could be true. I don't want to say that it wasn't, but it wasn't a point that took away from his crime. And so that is the strategy that they are using. They are trying to deflect away from their crime at all times. So we just have to be very aware. 70% of guilty offenders completely deny when first confronted, and 30% admit but minimize or rationalize their behavior. So we're never going to get full truth when we're working in these offenses with an offender, which is why we should leave it to the professionals. One of their tactics is actually discrediting a child. It's not uncommon for a specific child to be targeted, and that might be that troubled child, the one that is always getting in trouble, because wouldn't it be the perfect candidate to pick? So that way, if Sally is like a really bad kid, and then I harm Sally, and then Sally comes forward, I can say, Sally, are you going to take her word? Are you kidding me? The one that's the troublemaker. So they are strategic in trying to pick the children they can discredit. Some other things here, I told people she was mad at me because I punished her. I said she said it because she wanted to go live with her mother. I said she accused me because I wouldn't let her date. I convinced people that her friend made something like this up and got a lot of attention, so she did too. I accused her grandmother of coaching her. After I started abusing her, I told her mother that she told me someone else was touching her and that I thought she'd made it up, so her mother would be more skeptical if she ever told me. So again, from the moment that they are committing this crime, they are ready to be confronted, and they already have reasons that would change our mind and make us believe that this hasn't taken place. What's sad is the average child victim must tell at least 9 different people about their abuse before someone actually calls the police. That's just a stat. We talked about the number of crimes, and it's quite high. And when it does happen, offenders said that when a child had told or people had discovered, no one contacted the authorities. And this is a really big piece of why we're concentrating so much time on predators, because we know when something does happen, we need more education and more support on what happens after. What happens when we've heard? We don't talk enough about that point. When these things happen, I just did here, in every single in every single circumstance, it is a division that comes in your church. And we were looking at the biblical scripture. The wolf comes, the hired hand leaves, and the flocks go in different directions. They are pulling it apart. And that's exactly what we see in our churches, that someone will come in their crime, and if they are caught, this is what happens. So we absolutely need to be ready for that. I hope you guys have a better idea or a little bit of a clearer picture on what the predator looks like, the manipulation and the deception that they use. We're going to transition into probably the bulk of our training, which is to be a training that was aired on End It Now, and it's going to walk us through what we need to do as we're working with perpetrators. Before I get into that video, I am going to check the chat and just see if there's anything here. Hey, I see some things coming in. When I was a little girl, my mom stopped a deacon from placing me on his lap. My mom confronted him as he glanced at me multiple times. Kudos to your mom, because that is stopping that initial interaction, and they're looking for the parents that are not going to be involved in their children, that are not watching, which is why I think I mentioned to you earlier when someone say, hey, your daughter will get used to you know, old enough being in her own Sabbath school program, you can go back to the main sanctuary. And I just said, oh no, I'm not leaving my child. I have committed myself. I have children now. I'm committing myself to my child. If anyone is in this church that is assessing the families, they're not going to see that my child is not being supervised. I am going to be with her. So kudos to your mom, that she had caught that and stopped it before something had come forward. Just trying to see if there's anything.
Hello.
Hi, how are you? And just trying to get some of the comments before
Uh,
I go through. But go ahead, please share if you have a question for us.
when we had a member that actually I don't even know if he was a member. He used to help another member with song service. And after I got married, my husband said, I don't like the way so and so, like he's giving the kids like full body hugs, you know.
Mhm.
And he was bringing his granddaughter who was like 10 at the time, and I was bringing my granddaughter who was much younger. And after my husband passed, my daughter posted it on Facebook, so like anybody in the public could come. And now my granddaughter, who I used to bring occasionally, um, this was back in April. He passed in April. She opened up to me that that person that was assisting someone with song service, I don't even know if they remember, you know, that he was inappropriately touching her because she wanted to. He was giving her like singing classes, and I mean, you know, it was in like one of the downstairs classrooms. So it really like upset me. I'm like, you know, because so sometimes children don't tell you things till like years later.
Yeah.
And because the trauma, it's like I've learned and studied about things like that because, you know, the brain is such a, um, there's just so much mysteries we don't even know. We can't even touch the surface on the human body, and especially the brain, and when it has trauma. And sometimes things come out when people feel safe or the good Lord feels you're ready to deal with it. And so my life has changed because of that, because I have a younger granddaughter that's 10 years younger than my older granddaughter, and so and sometimes it's hard to keep a constant watch on your kids, especially if they're running around church with other kids, um and you have church duties. And so but
Mhm.
it was really hard for me to hear that, especially when I had it going on in my alcoholic. My dad was a functional alcoholic, so I almost feel like I'm like re-traumatized now through my grandchildren. And
Mhm.
I watch church on Zoom. I don't have much to you know, I'm not bringing my. I mean, there are Sabbath school teachers I've known for years, and I don't have a problem with that. And they want me to teach, and I don't even want to do that because. And then I said to the pastor, well, you know, because this woman that I used to work with who was a nurse, she was a Baptist, and she said, Liz, she goes, it's good they have things put in place for the children to make sure they're safe. She goes, what about the adults? Should these Sabbaths, and I know some churches don't have enough support, should the teachers now be alone with children in a room? So I have my concerns about that. I did go to another church and they did have another adult in the classroom. And
Yeah, we are actually gonna touch on that, where that's gonna be the last segment we talk about, because there, although we have to have a true picture of what's taking place, and it is discouraging to kind of have that realization of the unsafe things that are taking place. what I want to leave you with, there's actually so much we can do. So we have things to celebrate. Our children's program is something to celebrate, but we need to, now that we know that they're vulnerable, and where we are going to be targeted, we just need to have measures in place to keep our kids safe. So as burdensome as like, oh, wow, this is where we're at, really? Yes, but we have the information, and now what are we going to do with it? Because there is so much we can do for it. Yeah, we can't have our eyes on our children 100% of the time. Like, I've made that thing where I'm going to be with my children. Not everyone can do that. But are you checking on your children regularly? Are you doing the things that can help? Are you bringing your grandchild to the bathroom or your child to the bathroom, not letting them go on their own? There's things that our parents can do. It's not that they have to be with their child 100%. They are entrusting the children into our care. So what does it look like for our churches to do it safely? We're going to get into that. And I'm really sorry to hear that, something had taken place. One thing I appreciate about what you're saying is it was happening, just with someone singing in the front of the church. It wasn't even happening in a Sabbath school. And I think that's very important that we broaden our mind, because it's not just the Sabbath school teacher and it's not just the Pathfinder leader. Our predators and offenders are getting smarter, and they're seeing that we're going to be just concentrating. Okay, I'm going to concentrate on VBS, and it's because it's the children's program. Very important. But what we're seeing is that trend where it's not just that. It is the praise team member. Praise team is probably one of the bigger ones that we get hit on. It's the people involved in the music. It is the person, I gave the example earlier where the gentleman we had caught, but then he was doing the announcements in church. And so we're seeing where these offenders will place themselves in any area that they can in the church, and being at the front pulpit is definitely having that position and of authority, even though they might not have the title of elder, but they're going up and they themselves are leading out in something. And so we're going to expand our view and what we're monitoring. So we're going to get into that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And again, I'm very sorry to hear that something had taken place. We're going to try to do what we can now to see that that doesn't happen again in the churches, and that your other granddaughter will be safe in the church. So we're going to go into now, as I said, this is going to be the bulk of the training. I just found this training to be very good. It's going to be challenging to us. I'm not going to say that it's not, but we need to get to this next level of responding to sex offenders. What does that look like in our church? And so this presentation, as I said, was part of the End It Now Summit of Abuse in 2022. I'm going to play it now. And this is from a man, his name is Mike Sloan, and he's the director of the Godly Response to Abuse in Christian Environments. And their organization comes into organizations like the church. They help with investigations. They help, what do we do next? They walk churches through, how do we handle this safely? And so he's bringing his expertise and sharing it with our church. I'm going to play that for you now. It's a large and long video, which is why I said this is going to be the bulk of the training. Afterwards, I'll follow up on some of the nuts and bolts of then how do we make the church safe, and how do we use the programs that are available to us to monitor it. So let me play that for you now. Oh, excuse me. I actually have to share a different screen. I forgot. Let me, I have to switch. And we're going here. All right, guys. Again, this is responding to known offenders in your church, and this is with Mike Sloan.
Offenders in the church. I'm Mike Sloan, and I'm the director of safeguarding at Grace, Godly Response to Abuse in the Christian Environment. Grace is a Christian nonprofit ministry with a simple mission to educate and empower churches to recognize, prevent, and respond to abuse. We serve churches and organizations around the United States. I was a pastor for 10 years. Now, overlapping with that, I've spent the last 12 years training helping churches with policy development and doing consultation along with my colleagues. And one of the very common situations where churches reach out to us for consultation is when the church is approached by a registered sex offender who wants to join, or they discover that they had a known sex offender in their church, but that information was only recently discovered. My main goal for this training is that you as a leader would walk away with a deeper understanding of the issues involved to navigate these situations and prioritize, first and foremost, the protection of the vulnerable in the church in keeping with the priority in the teaching of Jesus. At the same time, I want you to walk away with a practical framework to assess whether a known offender should be a candidate to have any connection to your church. All right, so let's begin with some preliminary issues. And I want to begin with a story. A man emails the church office and asks to meet with the pastor. He's a convicted sex offender, and he's looking for a church that will accept him and welcome him despite his conviction. When he meets with the pastor, he explains that he did cross the line he should not have crossed. It was just one incident. It was his daughter, and she initiated some sexual contact with him after he had taken his medication and was kind of out of it. He knows he should have stopped it sooner. He feels terrible about all of this. He has worked incredibly hard to turn away from this, repent, and seek forgiveness. He and his wife and daughter are not together, but they have made peace. Through a discipleship ministry in prison, he has come to see how every moment of his life is now dedicated to God. God's grace to him and the death and resurrection of Jesus is the most precious thing to him. He wants to find a church so he can continue on this journey, and maybe God can use him to help others. Not serving with kids, but if there is some way he can volunteer in the church eventually, he would love that. The pastor is moved by his words and his testimony. This pastor loves to share stories of God's power to work and bring redemption in the most desperate of situations. Unfortunately, almost everything this man has told the pastor is a lie. How can leaders responsibly assess the words and actions of alleged or known offenders? What are some possible responsible actions leaders can take to assess the appropriateness of an offender participating in a church? This training is to give you better context and education, as well as some practical tools for situations such as these. So just a few other preliminary things. When we talk about offenders in these types of situations, I typically use the word known offenders so that it would encompass both those who have been convicted, but many offenders are never convicted or prosecuted. So admitted offenders as well would be classified among known offenders, and I think this approach would be helpful. And today, just to be clear, we're talking about adult offenders in the church. We're not talking about juvenile offenders, which often requires even further nuance. And a lot of the things we say here would actually not apply. So that's the more technical, specialized area. So get help and advice from experts. If you're in that situation, I will have some resources for you as well at the end, along with resources for adult offenders. The advice that we're going to walk through today, the approach we're going to walk through, I think applies well to sex offenders, whether it's a sex offender who is offended against an adult or children. Also, I think the basic approach, the general approach, could be applied to intimate partner violence offenders and clergy offenders, other forms of abuse and violence as well. But a lot of our focus and in the illustrations will be on sex offenders. All right, one more thing before we jump in. Of course, offenders may come to you in a variety of ways. They may announce themselves and say, hey, I'm here, I'm looking for a church. Can I talk to you about that? You may have someone in your church who is arrested and then convicted, sentenced, goes to prison for a while and then comes out and then wants to come back to your church. Or of course, you may find out that it is someone in your church already attending or a member, and you just didn't know about this history of offending. And again, it may be that they're convicted and maybe that they're not, just that they're an admitted offender, that's not really in doubt. All right, the two main lenses we're going to use as we make our approach, and this is the approach we take in all of our work at Grace. First and foremost is the lens of our Christian faith, that we're going to approach these issues understanding the priority and teaching of Jesus, drawing upon our faith tradition, drawing upon the Christian scriptures, and of course, fundamentally, the call of Jesus to love our neighbor as ourselves. And I find it very instructive and helpful to tell leaders in the church that we as leaders have to think when we're dealing with like a child sex offender, what would we want our leaders to do if we would imagine ourselves being a child again? If we were in this situation and a known offender was potentially going to be brought into our church and we were a vulnerable child, what would we want our leaders to do? And that is what we should be willing to do for the children of our church, because Jesus commands us to love our neighbor as ourselves. The other main lens we're going to bring to this approach is research on offenders. We want to take very much an informed approach, an educated approach, an evidence-based approach. So we need to understand the reality of offending, what we know about offenders and how they operate, so that we can work against that. And those are the two non-negotiable lenses we need to take when we make a sound approach to these issues. All right, I just want to lay out a few common mistakes that we see in interacting with churches on these issues very, very often. So just to get out a few of those kind of core mistakes that we might make, missteps that we might make as leaders. Again, not, of course, out necessarily at all, out of malice, often with very good intentions, and yet often there are some severe consequences nonetheless. So the first one is just making an assumption that offenders can attend. We cannot prevent anyone from attending church, so offenders must attend. Many times churches hear Christian words from offenders, a desire to come and assume that they are repentant if they want to attend church. So just these types of assumptions. Offenders can attend, there's nothing we can do if they want to attend to tell them or assess the situation. And that if they did want to attend, we just assume that they are repentant and because they want to be here. That would be actually a mistake. In many, many cases, that is not at all the case. All right, two, taking a risk management approach. You know, there are a lot of tools out there for churches for safety and safeguarding approaches and policy approaches and training video approaches that have been developed by insurance companies and lawyers. Now, I'm not against insurance or lawyers. In fact, some of my colleagues are lawyers and are some of the most informed people who care so deeply about protecting the vulnerable and God's priority. And yet, it is the case that a lot of insurance and legal approaches leave out expertise on safety issues, leave out expertise on research on offenders, and do not account for a broader perspective that incorporates Christian priorities as well as the priorities of those disciplines. So in our risk management approach, the focus tends to be on the institution. And as long as we protect the institution, so the focus then for an offender would be narrowly what is happening on church property, and that's our sole focus. That would be a mistake because, again, most offending occurs, in unstructured times and in homes. That's certainly true for child sex offenders and many other forms of offending as well. So if we're focused on protecting the institution as our main priority, There are other things that are vital to protecting children, to protecting the vulnerable. Again, notably that we're not going to insist as much upon accountability outside of the church. And often there's a lack of communication with parents so that there is more protection outside of the church. There's not as much education for parents and others outside of those who serve with kids in the hour of Sunday school or kids worship, the hour or two of student ministry that occurs during the week. And there's no serious plan for accountability very often in this approach that is, again, outside of a very narrow time at the church property. A third mistake is relying on the offender as the main source of information. Many churches, sadly, have taken this approach, and they just can't imagine that someone will be that brazen and lie, like in our story just a moment ago. And of course, this is often our Christian instinct in church, is that we believe the best, we take people at their word, and in most cases, that's fine, and that's a good thing. And yet, with offenders, going with offending is often a very much a pattern of deception and testing boundaries and manipulating others. That means that very often offenders are still in those patterns and seeking to manipulate leaders and churches. So that it is needed by leaders to seek out other sources of information, to judge and weigh the types of things they're hearing from the offender to assess whether they should be in the church. And then the last kind of just major mistake that we see often with churches is misplacing the burden of accountability. We cannot entrust the main burden of accountability to the offender themselves and expect that we're going to trust them with following these rules. They're going to follow the rules because they've agreed to it. And that's our approach. Again, that's not a wise approach. We need other things in place. We need people in that offender's lives, if we do judge that they're a candidate, to have some connection to our church. Yes, we need a plan. We need some boundaries and restrictions, but we need supervision, and we need a team approach that is often very difficult for churches to wrap their heads around because it is very demanding. But experts say that this is what is needed for safety. So we have to have a very, I think, sober assessment of our ability to even provide what is needed for safety in this type of approach. And again, the root of all of these very often is a lack of awareness and education and understanding of offender dynamics. And of course, Jesus calls us as leaders, by the way, in a context in Matthew 10, where he's talking about those who are predatory wolves among the sheep, those who are vulnerable. Jesus says that we are to be innocent as doves, but he says also we are to be wise as serpents. So again, I hope this training is helpful in that regard. So, behold, I'm sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves, therefore be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. So that's a charge to us as leaders, to be not naive, but to be educated, to be proactive, and to help bring safety and accountability amongst disciples. All right, now we're going to walk through some offender dynamics. And again, this is fundamental. This is essential to our approach. Beyond Jesus's words in Matthew 10, we have Jesus's famous words in Matthew 7, which I think are extremely relevant to these situations. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. So whether you've thought about it this way or not ever, but here Jesus is teaching basic abuse dynamics. He's talking about someone who is a part of a community, who is known and walks right in the front door, and everyone knows, and everyone expects to be there. And everyone looks to that person as someone who is a part of the community. They know the language of the community. And of course, in a church setting, in a faith-based environment, everyone thinks, we do not think that person would ever do that kind of thing, to abuse another person, to offend against another person. Jesus here is talking about someone who holds power and trust in the lives of others who are more vulnerable. Now, again, how does someone get away with that? It's not by openly declaring their intentions or openly offending against others, but offending is all wrapped up into deception and secrecy. So there's a very calculated living of a double life in the community. And that is, yes, targeted. The deception and manipulation is targeted at the potential victim, but it's also targeted at caregivers. And really, in a general way, it's targeted at the whole, at the whole community. So that is what current researchers, by the way, will tell you about abuse dynamics. And that is incredibly encouraging to me, as sobering as it is, but incredibly encouraging that Jesus made these exact same points 2,000 years ago. One of the foremost researchers on offenders is Dr. Anna Salter in her kind of landmark book, Predators. She, and by the way, her research is all based upon, in large part, going to prison after prison to interview offender after offender to say, how did you do this? What tactics did you use? And part of her conclusions is that, again, offenders use very much calculated manipulation and deception of others in whatever community they're in, whether that's a church community or otherwise. One of the most striking quotes in that book is this from an offender. I consider church people easy to fool. They have a trust that comes from being Christians. This was a quote from a pastor who molested multiple children in the church. This is, of course, a very chilling quote, but that is, again, the reality of most offenders that we're dealing with, is these intentional patterns of deception. So offending involves patterns of deception that often continue after someone is caught. In most cases where churches reach out to us and they walk through, okay, now that we're aware of this, what's going on? And very often the pattern that continues are patterns of deception, patterns of testing to see if the church leaders will accept the explanation and framing that the offender gives after they're caught. And they can't they can't deny that, outright, but they're still trying to gain control of how the leaders view them. And they're using a lot of distortions, manipulations, twisting of reality. And there are very common patterns of these types of distortions. And so this is actually critical for us to assess where an offender might be. Is one major tool we have is to get familiar with these types of distortions and listen for them as we talk to an offender. So common distortions would be forms of denial, minimizing, excusing, flat out lying, and then shifting blame, just to start with 5 common ones. Now, just some examples. So denial can take many forms. That's not what happened. I never said that. It was a false allegation, some form of denial. Now, sometimes the denial is not fully possible. So the offender knows they can't fully deny it, so they try to minimize it in some way. Well, it was a misunderstanding. I never intended for anyone to get hurt. It was a mistake. It was, I did this, but it wasn't what they said it was. It wasn't abused. It was, something less impactful. Excusing, well, he initiated it. She initiated it. I was on my medication and kind of out of it, like we heard in the story earlier. And sometimes it's things like, well, I was abused as a child, and I guess I've never dealt with that. And certainly we want to have all compassion for someone who was offended against as a child. And yet there is a myth out there, very often promoted by offenders themselves, that the reason for offending is when someone is offended against as a child. There's actually nothing in the research on child sex offenders that actually gives any weight to that, however. Certainly children, when they're exposed to certain abusive behaviors, or actions can sometimes act those out or repeat those, but there is no research that suggests that when a child is offended against sexually as a child, when they reach adulthood, that they are any more likely than anyone else as an adult to offend against children. That's actually a myth. And sadly, that's a stigma that is put on many, a further stigma that is put on many survivors of child sexual abuse. Many churches ask survivors or ask those who sign up to volunteer with children if they are a survivor of abuse, because they will think, that the thinking is we'll have to account for that in whether we have you serve with children. And we always tell churches, take that question out. You can ask people if they've ever offended against someone, if they've ever been accused of abuse, if they've ever abused a child or someone else. Those are very good questions to ask, but not to ask if they were a survivor, if they are a survivor of abuse. Lying, I just didn't want to make the child go to court, so I pled guilty. This didn't happen, but I just didn't want to put a family through that, so I pled guilty, and that's why I have this conviction, but it's not true. Many offenders will lie and use that because it, again, endears them. It makes them sound sympathetic in that approach. It sounds heroic even in some sense, right? This is the only time this has happened. Many offenders say things like that. The reality is most sex offenders, especially child sex offenders, have multiple victims. I was just trying to educate her about sexuality. We hear the most outlandish lies from offenders. I was just trying to help them. I was just trying to teach them. I was just trying to educate them, and on and on and on. And those are common distortions that we as leaders have to be able to recognize and understand to respond appropriately. And then shifting blame. At the time, my wife was not speaking to me. I was under a lot of stress. My marriage was in a hard place. And again, the focus, the blame, the root of the issue is shifted away from the offender and the entitlement that the offender has, that they chose to do this. I want to take what I want and do what I want and use people how I want for my own gratification. The abuser shifts blame away from that reality towards stress, towards a relationship they were in, towards the actual victim themselves. This child took their hands down my pants and I didn't stop it immediately. Well, what am I to do? I was under a lot of stress from my job at the time, shifting blame elsewhere, especially, of course, toward the victim. Offender distortions signal loud and clear that an offender is not taking full responsibility and is therefore a danger to others. This must be emphasized. We have to be able to recognize these dynamics and these distortions. And we have to understand what they signal, what they mean. They mean that an offender is actively seeking to deflect accountability and not be responsible and take ownership for the impact for their actions. And that signals that they are a danger. They are an active danger to others. That's what it means. We have to be very clear about that. And again, the stakes are high. Child sex offenders have multiple victims. Many other types of offenders also have multiple victims. The stakes are incredibly high for us as leaders. Now, we're Christians, which means grace and forgiveness is at the very heart of our faith. So what about this issue of forgiveness? Mike, isn't this all very harsh? What about someone who is genuinely repentant, and can we have forgiveness? Can we have grace? Well, many times I'm asked, do you believe God can change people? And as a Christian, I say, yes, I do believe that. I do believe that God can change people. However, just be aware that many offenders love that question. Offenders love that question because it takes the focus off of them and their specific behaviors and the specific words that they're using that we might assess, often distortions. And it puts it on a general idea about whether God can do something. And that takes the focus away from the offender and what they've done and what they're doing now, and puts it on a general question that, of course, most Christians have no problem answering in the affirmative, that yes, God can change people. Yes, there can be grace and forgiveness. So we just have to be aware of that dynamic. So grace and forgiveness are at the center of our faith. And we might ask the question, well, wait, isn't this what the church is for? At its very heart, the church is supposed to be a place for sinners. We might even refer to the Bible and say, well, what? Jesus ate with sinners. And I would say, yes, that's true. Jesus ate with sinners. The church is a place for sinners. Amen. I have no problem with either of those statements. I think those are true. But we have to remember that abuse is not a sin like other sins. Jesus talked about a response to abuse in the Bible. In John 10, Jesus said, when the wolf comes, the hired hand who does not care for the sheep runs away and does not put themselves on the line to keep the wolf away from the sheep. Jesus says, of course, the good shepherd steps in the way, essentially, and does not let the wolf get at the vulnerable sheep, but instead puts themselves on the line to keep the wolf from accessing the vulnerable sheep. Now, in the context of John 10, what is Jesus talking about? Well, Jesus is using words and imagery direct from prophetic passages like Ezekiel 34 and Jeremiah 23. And the issue in those contexts are leaders who are abusing their power, using the sheep, preying upon the sheep, feeding on the sheep, domineering the sheep. So in this passage in this context of abusive leaders and using other people, dehumanizing other people for the gratification of the leader, Jesus gives this directive that we as leaders, good shepherds, following the one and only good shepherd, Jesus, are to step in the way and not let those wolves access and get at those vulnerable sheep. There is no higher priority for leaders than protecting the vulnerable and insisting that those who are predatory or have been predatory are accountable. Make no mistake, though our Christian faith absolutely has at its root ideas of grace and forgiveness, it also at the very core has these ideas of leaders using power to protect vulnerable people. This reflects the heart of God. Paul, in his letters, talks about those who are harming others, preying upon others, deceiving others, looking for those who are more vulnerable. And Paul has some very strong words. He says, I appeal to you, brothers, to watch out for those who cause divisions and create obstacles contrary to the doctrine that you've been taught. Avoid them. Avoid them. For such persons do not serve our Lord Christ, but their own appetites. And by smooth talk and flattery, they deceive the hearts of the naive. Again, Paul is not just talking about beliefs. Doctrine includes a way of life. And so it's how someone is living and making their way and using their position in a faith community to look for those who are weaker, to weed them out, to deceive and use and act toward them based on their own appetites for their own gratification. Again, we would rightly classify this type of behavior as predatory or abusive. And Paul says, look, avoid them. He goes on in 2 Timothy to say, but understand this, that in the last days there will come times of difficulty, for people will be lovers of self, lovers of money, proud, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, and on. And then he says, avoid such people, for among them are those who creep into household and capture weak women, burdened with sins and led astray by various passions. Again, the command to avoid and do not let someone around those who are more vulnerable is connected to this idea of intentionality and praying upon others. So just a few other, and there are other examples in the Bible, but that's just a couple of, I think, powerful ones. Just know that many offenders use grace and forgiveness as a tool of manipulation. It is very hard to judge, but in our experience, what we've seen over and over again is that when an offender immediately brings up ideas of forgiveness and grace, that is almost always signaling that this is a deliberate tactic on their part to try to engender sympathy and to try to continue to manipulate. Again, offending involves typically a pattern of testing boundaries, looking for opportunities, looking for information, looking for vulnerabilities and things to exploit. So when someone is caught, you don't just turn off these patterns. The patterns continue, but the tactics in the testing is, if I say this lie, if I minimize in this way, if I excuse in this way, will you accept it? Can I frame it in this way? Can I admit to the very least that I can own up to? And then will you accept it? Will you accept that this is resolved, or God's grace brings resolution? And then we can kind of quickly move on with as little consequences or accountability as possible. So we cannot lead with grace and forgiveness. That's not appropriate. In fact, Jesus in Luke 17, in a passage dealing with sin among a genuine Christian, not really a wolf, but even then Jesus says, if your brother sins, the first thing is not forgiveness. It's not grace. The first appropriate action, notice the order here, is rebuke, a word of accountability. Rebuke him. And if he repents, there's a conditional. And with sex offenders, especially, child sex offenders, we have to have a track record. We have to have the time often to see if there is genuine, real fruit of repentance that we can see. And then notice the very last part has to do with forgiveness. But again, even this passage again is not dealing with an abuse, someone who is an offender. It's dealing with someone who is a genuine Christian, not a wolf in sheep's clothing. Many offenders would not be classified in biblical language as genuine Christians. There is a verse, again, multiple places in the Bible, that God resists the proud but gives grace to the humble. Jesus, of course, embodied this. Jesus was the most compassionate, present, concerned person when someone came out of desperation and great humility because they were disabled, they were sick, their child was sick and dying. We can think of so many stories where Jesus embodied giving grace to the humble. And yet Jesus, for a whole chapter, issued prophetic rebuke against the leaders who prayed wonderful prayers, but used their spiritual position to target and steal houses from widows. God resists the proud. And this is the mentality we are to embody as Christians. We are not to simply have a generic, we forgive everyone, we just move on. Again, that's not Christian at all. We are to rebuke, hold people accountable when they are in arrogance and in entitlement, preying upon others, abusing others. So pastoral care for offenders begins with accountability. It doesn't begin with grace and forgiveness. If we genuinely love someone, if we genuinely care for their well-being, we will insist that they are accountable. That is the only way, and often on a very long path, that they can come to a place of forgiveness and repentance and then forgiveness. So effective ministry to offenders can only be done by those who are equipped to call out offender distortion. So that accountability begins with those very first conversations of, you have to own up to what you did without excuses, without minimizing, without shifting blame anywhere else. And that is often, and those who work in treatment programs for sex offenders will tell you that is often very tedious work. So abusers are often skilled at utilizing the language of the Bible to appear repentant. look, we have to know as Christians that, we can, genuinely embrace the faith, know the language of our church and our faith community. And yet someone can learn that without having a genuine faith, without having good intentions as a part of our community. Offenders are often very astute at listening, picking up on that language, and utilizing that language to convince people that they are repentant. So words are not the final judge ever. Just the words of an offender are not the final assessing tool we would ever use. Because again, of these patterns of deception and manipulation, we have to use other information to rightly assess what is needed. So we have to have great care. We need to assess the fruit of repentance over time if we're doing this in an informed way. And beware of anyone, and certainly the offender themselves, if they try to set forgiveness against accountability. That is a huge warning signal, one of the largest that we can ever get. One of my mentors, a former board member of Grace for many years, Dr. Diane Langberg, she says, look, Christians can be so desperate to see redemption that we are quick to identify it where it has never been. And that can be very dangerous. So that is just a wise word from someone who has worked with many offenders and worked with many survivors in her work over the years. Now, what about the practicalities of evaluation? We want to think about policies that are effective. We help churches with policy in this area. So here are some things that we would recommend. Churches, first of all, do well to establish a policy ahead of time that will, establishes a process to assess whether an offender will participate. I think we do need to look at each situation on their own. Now, here's the thing. Many times in how the offender approaches you, or you can see immediately, or you believe likely immediately they're lying to us, you don't have to necessarily follow through with a long process or invest a ton of resources in that. You can use your best judgment. Sometimes, and we work with many churches who, after talking to us, they feel very strongly that the offender is just lying and deploying a ton of cognitive distortions. And it's very obvious that they're not a good fit, that they're not a safe person that they would want around the vulnerable people in their church. So we start with a few offender limits in policy, saying things like, our church will require a very high level of accountability from any known offenders. Known offenders will not hold any positions of power and trust, period. That's just a good limit to put in place. Offenders must agree to a thorough process of evaluation and agree to accept what leaders will require. Many times, if you begin with these basic boundaries and expectations, the offender will do the work for you and say, well, I'm not interested in being in a church like this. And they'll say, this is not a good fit for me. And then again, that I think is, good in that you are not having to invest more time and resources when someone is not committed at all to being accountable. So that's actually, I view that as a good outcome for the church and for the vulnerable people within the church. You can show the offender your policy and ask if they're willing to enter into and cooperate with such a process. That's, a good preliminary step very often to see if they will just, what is their basic posture, attitude towards being very much accountable. Those who are repentant, genuinely repentant, and genuinely demonstrating real fruit of repentance will have no problem with accountability. That's a real important test. So we use a process such as this. And again, it's just a general process. We'll fill in some details as we go. Interview with a known offender. This might be a two-step process. You might have that kind of preliminary initial conversation about the general approach and expectations, see if they're willing to enter into that. And then you might have a little more of a more in-depth talk where you ask some more pointed, very direct questions about certain things. And I'll give you some examples of those. Looking for other information. We have to access other information, whether that's from people like family members, the treatment provider, that they give us their consent, that we sign off on to talk to, counselor, parole officer, probation officer, others who have information related to the offender, the offenses, to the situation. That's very important. That's often where we're going to be able to judge the words we're hearing from the offender. And then not just people, but records. There are almost always with convictions through courts, there are public records. There's often reports before someone is sentenced, if they are convicted and then sentenced. So accessing those records will often give us, again, more information that we can use to assess what's appropriate if someone is deploying distortions, or if not, what about their offenses needs to be accounted for in the plan of accountability for that person. So we assess then, once we have words from the offender, once we have information from other people involved or have knowledge of the situation and records, we can, often with experts and help, can assess the offender, what we're hearing. Are we hearing a lot of distortions in those patterns? What do we make of that? But if we aren't seeing those types of distortions and we think someone is genuinely showing repentance and turning away, and that this is harmful and I want to be accountable and this is genuinely what I want, then, again, only then do we ask questions about what level of participation, what accountability and safeguarding requirements are we going to impose. We do have to listen to any known survivors who want to have a voice about the impact that having an offender might have in their life. And having an offender, even if it's not the offender who hurt them, what that would mean to them having such an offender in church. So sometimes that's not possible, but if we can have a conversation like that from survivors in our church, I think that's wise. So it's recommended that we consult with those who have some experience and training on offender dynamics throughout the process. It's not expected that church leaders are experts on these issues. So getting a little bit of consultation
Hey guys, we're going to pause the video right there, and we're going to continue a little bit. He gets into a little bit more of the policy. I hope that was really helpful. Again, I just think that this is the next level that we have to take our churches, is very good training on the reality of working with an offender and really assessing whether or not having an offender in our churches is even possible. Sometimes we like to think that, or there's the stigma that participation and attendance in a church is a right, but that's actually not the case. It is a privilege. And our churches have to assess if their congregation is a good place and a good match for an offender. If you're a church with a lot of children's programs, you may not necessarily be the right fit, but maybe in the district, there is a church that would have the membership to support monitoring and bringing that person within the congregation for the attendance. So I just want to place this, and again, it is very challenging for us because it goes against a lot of the things that maybe we originally think. Again, everyone deserves forgiveness. Of course they do. But again, it comes through a process, and using the forgiveness as a way to pull away from accountability should only actually make us realize, whoa. This is a way to deflect. And perhaps this person is not ready yet for a placement in our church. So again, that's food for thought. As you carry this out in your churches, I want you guys to have, be equipped to be working with offenders in the church. The last part that he was getting into in terms of investigation is kind of where the conference worker would come in, where we're not asking churches to do investigation at all. first off and foremost, if there's ever an incident that comes in, we always work with state agencies. But there are times where a church has to come in after the fact. Maybe something happened 10 years ago or happened 5 years ago, and we need to find information. There are times where the conference has to actually go out and see what information there is regarding the matter. We're gonna go ahead and we're gonna focus now on the last piece here, and that is, let's see if I can, that is, we're gonna begin to speak to sorry, I'm gonna go back to go. Okay, we are from current slide. We're going to start talking about all the measures that we have in our grasp. Certainly, we have talked about the issue. We talked about the complexities of working with a perpetrator, but now how do we put this in place? So about 10 years ago, the church really did a great effort, and they spent time just really reviewing the cases that had come in, and was there anything that we could grasp from it, learn from it, and then take it back so that way we can ensure our children are safe. These are some of the protocols that they came up with. And I'm gonna move this bar, unfortunately, kind of distorts, the Zoom controls distort some of the images. But here I have the child protection policies. So the church was seeing incidents were happen when there was only one adult present, with children. And so they said, hey, well, that's easier for us to ensure that that doesn't happen again. We will insist that our programs have a 2 adult policy, and that's not a teenager and an adult. It is actually 2 adults present in a program. And so as you're working on this in your churches and you're educating your churches, you really want to make sure all your programs are adequately supervised. And if you remember, I pointed out one of the largest categories is minor on minor offenses, and it's taking place because there's a lack of supervision as well. So supervision is a huge thing, not only for allowing abuse to take place with an adult, but it's also the lack of supervision is meaning that our teens and our children are hurting each other as well. There is something that's called open door policy. And again, this policy was created because we're seeing that incidents are happening behind closed doors. The school gym closet door, behind, think about your church, all the areas. Is everything visible? Or, what about the pastor's office or different rooms in the church? Are they all open? Or do they have windows, or are there places where there's privacy? And where there's privacy, bathroom would be a big one. There are incidents, and there are, even in this conference this year, had a situation in a bathroom. I always say a great thing for churches to do is just begin educating the church in front every week. Parents, make sure you go to the bathroom with your children. Parents, make sure you go to the bathroom with your children. And it can't be something that's just announced one time. We have to just retrain. And again, because the churches are normally that safe space, we need to educate our congregations and, helping parents to just get their mindset that, hey, I need to be a little bit more present with my children. We do have a subsidy that is available to churches, and I'm going to have a slide on that. And that is, if you are going through the church and you're saying, hey, this door doesn't have a window and this one doesn't, I can certainly have the door open during programs. Or even better is we start installing vision panels in our door, changing the doors out that have a vision panel. So that is available, and I'll get the specifics on a slide for you guys. Another thing we're seeing is that we're not just waiting the right amount of time to actually get to know who is coming in to volunteer. And so because we're wearing multiple hats, or for whatever reason, or, we just see a desire and eagerness to work in our programs and we take it at that, people will use that to actually harm us because we didn't get to know our volunteers, and we're allowing them to serve. And so we need to have this time period where we can actually get to know our members, those transferring in before they begin volunteering. And then just like today, this education, we need to be talking about this more than just in August or, so what are we doing? And in your role, that is one of the pieces, is actually training your leadership with the resources that we have available. But certainly every volunteer needs to go through child protection training and background screening. And we do use an online program, which many of you have done already, which is Adventist Screening Verification, powered by Sterling Volunteer, that provides that. So everyone will have a base level of training. But beyond that, what can you do as ministry leaders to bring your church boards and other leaders and volunteers in the church into having this type of information? So this is the groundwork. Where you see an incident that takes place in our churches, something has failed on this list. Every single time, the whole list, maybe just one of the things. You could have everything right and you didn't require that background screening from one person one time. Like the example I gave earlier, the elder who had harmed the child and he was convicted and they still allowed him to keep serving. They didn't require him to do a background check. And so he got away with it. Or I think of another one where they had required a deacon to do a background check, but they allowed him to be one-on-one with a child, and he would transport a child to a nursing home every week to do a program in church. And in doing so, the child was abused, and the church has to take responsibility for our actions because we have failed in this protocol. So these are the safe measures. If we are doing this, number one, it's a deterrent, because if someone comes in and sees that we're proactively carrying this out, they certainly do not want to be in a church that is looking and watching and having these expectations. And it just keeps our kids safe. Keep going. This is the assistance program I was just speaking about, where we're trying to get churches to the point where we really believe in this as a conference, and we would like to make sure there's an open door policy in place. Again, you can have the door open, but if we can, the window is even better. So can we provide some types of subsidy to start getting churches in the direction of having good and safe spaces for their volunteers? So there's no accusations that are going on, and that we can also view our children. Now, it's really important, and I'm hoping that you're getting through this training, that the protocols we have in place for child protection training and screening is not just for youth volunteers, but it is for all ministry leaders and officers voted or appointed by the local church. So we're getting to the point where all the measures that are having, the training and the background screening, is for all volunteers, not just the VBS worker, not just the adventurer leader and their staff. It is for elder and the deacon and the treasurer and all of the offices and all of the support staff that is working within the church. And here we spend so much time on predators today. NAD church policy, which this is part of. These policies come from what's called the Child Protection Policy for North American Division, FB20. And this is also part of FB20, where we actually are speaking to what are we supposed to do when there is someone in our midst that has harmed someone? What's the framework, and what do we expect to provide for them? And so again, this is another piece that has to be carried out and shared with your churches. So here we get to our ministry. And where do I go from here, April? I know this is all this information, but where do we actually begin from this training on? Well, there are several areas that we are asking you to lead in. One is the education and promotion of child protection. So the discussion we're having here, don't let it end. Bring information like this to your churches. Do people even know the policies? The FB20, it's spelled out and it's on our website, so you can get the policy and just have the church board read it out. So equipping your church and your church board and educating them, because if they understand what's taking place, they'll be more likely to grab onto it and support you and be aware and be an extra set of eyes to be looking out for our children. There is something that has been drafted called the Child Protection Policy. Again, it's something already supplied, but it's something that you have to sit down with your church board and actually look through, in addition to an offender participation agreement. Our conference just worked on revising that because we have seen that offenders is a very loose definition, whereas it's not just someone that is convicted. What do you do with someone that has had multiple accusations over a period of time, and you have 3 children come forward and say something has happened? And so our conference agreement actually has expanded it so that way we can use it for someone that is accused and has gone through a process with the conference, or a convicted sexual offender. So do you have these pieces in place at your church? And so as a leader, after educating your church board, it's actually going through these documents and saying, as a church, we need to come up with church child protection policy. One's already drafted for you. It's kind of a fill-in. So the Village Church, the College Church, the New Bedford Church, Hartford Spanish, Crosswalk Church, whatever it is, as a board, we're going to come together, we're going to agree on this policy, and we're going to understand what it looks like for the participation agreement. So those 2 pieces as leaders is very much carrying out and leading people, educating. And then the last 2 is kind of where usually people think we focus all of our time, and that's to manage our volunteer listing and to use the program adventist screening verification. Those are very important, but it's actually just one piece of what is taking place. I'm going to show you what it looks like to actually be in these programs. We're going to go to adventist screening verification for a moment and start from here now. So as local church administrators, you will be able to monitor which volunteers have gone through training in child protection and background screening. And until a volunteer has completed it and is marked as eligible, they should not be serving. So when you sign up with the conference, you have to fill in a specific form, which is saying, hey, April, my congregation, my pastor has signed off, or my head elder, and my church has signed off that I can have access, that I am the coordinator and I'm managing this for my church. When you do this, you're going to have access the same account that every volunteer goes through. You are doing as well. You're going to do the training and the background check. But now, as the leader, you're going to have what's called the administration tab, which you didn't have before. And it brings in all these tools to the left-hand side of the screen, if you see, of what you're going to use to manage your church. You can do searches, just a regular user search, users or user search. It's basically the same thing. It's just a user search allows you to put like an email address if you didn't have a last name, but you can search to see who has gone through and has an account in your system. But most often than not, you're going to be using what's called a compliance report. This is where it is. You would just click on this. You have to hit the button run report for anything to generate for you. And when you do, you'll see that results will appear. And so here's just a little demo account. This is not real information. I've just placed in here fictitious people so we can see together what it looks like when we would run a report. Now, this is a larger picture of that same screen, just so you can see. It's very easy to see right away. Well, number one, are all the volunteers in my church listed here? Or is there only a few? Because then you know how to help people through the process. So number one, if I have 10 volunteers and I only have 5 people listed, then I know I need to work with 5 individuals to start getting their information and getting started in this process of training and screening online. They're doing it on their own. Training is now available in French, Portuguese, and it's always been available for English and Spanish. But for French and Portuguese, you actually have to coordinate with me, and I have to assign the training. So just to keep that in mind, it's not going to be completely a smooth line process just now. It's just, we're very grateful it's available, and we're going to work through assigning as we need. Later on, we're going to see how we can get that process streamlined, and you can select any of the language trainings. So here's the compliance report. You can see the first name, the last name, what are they doing in the church. You can have multiple places where you're serving in this conference. So if I'm volunteering in a school and a church, I probably want to have both of them listed so I don't have to do this multiple times. And both locations can see my information. And then you can see, am I an active volunteer? So you will have access to list someone as active or not active, you know, if someone maybe 1 year is not serving. Have I done my training? It is good for 3 years. Have I done my background check? That is good for 3 years. When does it expire? And am I compliant? Am I eligible? And so here on this list, you would see basically no one in the church is actually approved to volunteer, but you do get down. I've included my information here, and you can see I've signed up for these roles. I've signed up for all of these places that I want them to have access to my information. I'm helping out in a couple areas. You see that I've done the training 2023. It's good for 3 years. It will expire in 2026. And then this is the type of background check. You'll see everyone have an L3. That's a national background check. And sometimes you'll see plus DR or MVR. It's listed 2 different ways in the system, but that's a driving report. And whenever you have someone serving in a youth role, you should be having them do an L3 and a driving. Just by checking off when they're setting up their account that I'm doing Pathfinders, it will automatically assign them based on the role. And then you can see right here that I am marked as eligible. You have access as leaders to change a password. We don't see what the passwords are, but you do have access to change it. In addition, you are able to list someone as active or inactive. So we'll change that Y on the compliance report. If they're not active, then it will say no. And here's just some of it. When you're in my account, you can change my account information if you know I've moved, telephone number. You can see a background check. Now, this is one of a big change here, and this is where I just want to spend just a couple minutes, and then we're going to finish up. But here you can see now on my background check tab that I have listed references. In the past, until this time, you have had to collect a form from volunteers. You no longer have to do that because that information at this point is going to be supplied right into the system. So you can see that I have put in Heather Way, Bob Myers, and Sandy May, and I have filled that in. And now it is waiting for you, the administrator, to come in and review it and make a call for referencing. When you do, when you click on, so here you would click on Review Verify, and here you'll see it has a reference contact information. I could email, I could call, and then I'm going to say, yes, I completed it, and I completed the call on 1/10/2025, and you save it. I do not have access. The person is not me at the conference, but the actual person is not going to have access to see the notes that you have placed here. But if there's anything that comes up within those reference calls, you should contact me and also alert your pastor. When you have finished entering that information in, do you see how now it is marked who updated it? Now this one is completed, and I am saying in the comments that I completed it on 1/10/2025. So as managers, you're going into each name and you are making sure that in the background check tab that you have also worked with the references. Now, you would have probably done this process with the paper. And so if someone has not renewed and started using the references, don't worry about filling that in just yet. You used the papers in the past and you called it, and that'll be fine. On the next cycle where someone needs to retrain and do their background check, we will grab this information. So anyone in the last probably 3 months, you'll start seeing this, and this is something that you will be engaging in.
April, is that mandatory for the individual? Is there,
When someone's creating their account, it's required for them to fill in and
okay,
put 3 references. Yeah, they can't create the account without filling it in.
got it. Thank you.
Yep.
I do have
All
one
right.
more question. I'm sorry. Back
Sure.
on the list, when you were showing those who were eligible, I have volunteers who are no longer participating. How do I remove them from the report? All I need to do is just go and change them to inactive, or I just need to know how I can remove them.
Yep.
Thank you.
So you can never remove someone that's on your list at this point. You know, we are in talks of improving this site. In fact, I was just on a meeting with NAD representatives, and we got together about 3 major conferences using the program, and we just went through some of the improvements that need to take place. So you're going to see improvements coming. But for now, I would just use the account status active, inactive. And so we're not taking someone off. Now, if someone transfers their membership and hey, they went to Florida, you can encourage them and say, hey, Bob, I know you're attending the Tampa, Florida church, and would you like us to transfer your record so you don't have to redo it there? And then everything happens with their permission. The person's account is their permission. But if you don't have that permission, or you don't know where they've gone, or they're just sitting on the sidelines for, you know, a year, then you would use this and switch it to inactive and make sure you save it. Okay. I was letting you guys know that the training is now available in French and Portuguese. It was previously in English and in Spanish. If anyone needs me to help them assign French or Portuguese training, just let me know. And this is just kind of to show you that this program has been really integrated into many of the programs in our conference. We are trying to take this program so seriously that we want you to find it in the youth department. We want you to find it when you're reporting officers. And maybe not you necessarily, although you probably wear multiple hats, but you're going to be working with the leaders in your church. So the officer update form, which your clerk would fill in, now requires that they work with you, because we want another way for churches to keep checking and say, yep, the head elder is all set and the clerk is all set. And in the back, we want to know, did you adopt the child protection policy? When did you do it? Do you have sex offenders attending your church? How many have you engaged that participation agreement? So as you can see, we are child protection ministry, but now we're pulling into other offices to make sure the work is getting done. And then you can see for Adventure and Pathfinder Club application, again, it is requiring your involvement. You need to be viewing, yes, I've seen that these 10 people have gone through the program and I'm signing off that they are compliant. And finally, guys, on our website is a lot of the information that we covered. The policies that I referenced, NAD FB20 is there. The poster with the framework of what we're trying to accomplish and it makes a difference is right on our website. If you have a suspect, anything that has taken place in your church, we've listed, hey, if you're in Connecticut, here's the number. If you're in Massachusetts, here's the information. Please make the report to your state agency. If we receive something at the conference, my first call is to state agency as well. Amateur screening verification now has customer support in French, Portuguese, and Spanish, which we didn't have before. So as people go through, if there's an error that is encountered in the system, send them to this number, because now we have support in all the languages. And it's better to send them to this number rather than me, because I have trust services and this, and then working with the church that had the offense taking place. And what happens is, for this base level support, sometimes it gets bogged down. And I don't want that to happen. I want people to have immediate assistance. So if it's something simple like, hey, my background check isn't going through, or hey, this didn't take place, or the very simple thing, send your volunteers to this customer support and they will be able to help. And that is on, the information is on our website. And the last thing again is here, some of the resources, there's additional trainings, the policies that I'm asking you guys to educate your churches on and start beginning to work, more information about sex offenders in church. Basically, we try to have as much resources for you guys right within our website. So I just wanted to share that with you as well. And I am gonna close. We'll have questions later for sure for those that need to stay behind, but I just want to empower you. At the very beginning, I was telling you the two paths our church has taken. Normally, I always see the wrong path taken. And it's so harmful for our children, for the victim that is watching to see how we're gonna care for them. And it just goes on. It's a ripple effect of the destruction that comes, the division that takes place. And I'm going to tell you, the path is harder when we do the right thing. There will be pushback. There will be stones thrown at you. And so you are taking on a big call. But when you do take on the call and you speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, you have done this, the very thing that you see in that picture. You have protected your church. You have protected the children most of all. You've protected families, and you are part of the healing to victims to say what you have gone through matters. Your experience matters. I'm so sorry you went through this, but as you can see what I'm doing now, I never want it to happen to someone else. And that can be a part of healing for some of the victims that have already experienced this. So I thank you for taking on this very large call. This ministry is so hard. You have signed up for the hardest ministries in your church, but the reward is great. And God is just having this huge assignment for you. And I am saying thank you. And I know He is just going to be with you. And we'll have a prayer. I'm going to pray for you guys in this role. After the prayer, I'm going to stay on. But for those that like to, get off, it's the end of the training. You can go and get through your day. I appreciate the time that you spend, and then I'll stay behind. But let's close with prayer, and then we can stay on for questions, okay? Dear Heavenly Father, I just thank you, Lord, that through this whole day, we've been able to focus our time and attention, Lord, on this ministry, this great ministry that you have called us to. Lord, the work is great, but Lord, our children are worth it. And so I'd ask that you be with every single person here in their leadership role, that you would walk with them through this process, that you would be with the churches to receive this information, that you would have a protection, your protected hand on the churches and the children and the families in each of these places, Lord. Lord, we know the wolf is coming, but as the good shepherd, we look to you as our good example. Just inspire us, Lord, and give us the strength and wisdom to carry on this task. Thank you, Lord, for hearing this prayer. In your name, we pray these things. Amen. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for staying on. Thank you for being a part of this training and ministry. And again, I'm going to look at the chat, but feel free to go ahead and unmute if you have a question. I'd be happy to address it.
Yeah, April, I have a question about the website. I know for now we just send the link to leaders or volunteers to register and take the training and the background check. Does the website have an option where we, the coordinators, can maybe type in the email address of the leader or volunteer and send an invite to them so they can just access the site with the invite?
I have done in the past kind of a generated email that could be forwarded. We can do something like that again, where you could send it and it's kind of, hey, it's time to renew. There's our renewals already in the system. But for now, what I'm going to show you, just going to the live site. In the live site, in this bottom section, there's a section that's called volunteers. Do you see this? Is it coming up for you where it says volunteers?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So in our website, you could send your volunteers to this very section. It says all volunteers must complete the training, referencing, and background check process through Adventist screening verification. And then it will be the link for them and it will send them right over to the website. And then it gives information. This is available in multiple languages. And if you need French or Portuguese, contact customer service. And the instructions, English and Spanish, are there. So you can send volunteers right here and just say, come here, or you can just send them the direct link to set up an account here.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
I have a question.
Sure.
My pastor a while ago had set me up for this, but I hadn't had a chance to follow up with it because I'm the church clerk as well. So I've been like busy, but and now I'm doing this. So would I have to have my pastor sign off on this again, or do I still have an account?
Yeah, no, there's some forms I still have. I'm so sorry with the holiday. I mean, I really apologize. Right after Christmas, our family got hit, I would say, with the 10 plagues. We had RSV, pneumonia, ear infections, COVID, all right after Christmas. So if you had given a form, you don't need to send in another form. There's at least 5 forms that I need to actually process. Now I'm going to be back into the office next week.
Well, it was
So
it was a while ago that he had done that. It was like
so check with me on Monday, because then I can look at the forms that I have. And if for any reason I don't see yours, then we can work on that. Okay?
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, 'cause it had been set up a while ago, and you had emailed me, and then I had just never gotten to
Oh,
do
okay.
it.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. I got it. Now I got it. Okay. So you're set up. Got it. So if you're set up, then you're still set up. Okay. Unless someone has come in to
Okay.
basically replace you, your account will stay open. And
Okay, so
the training you just got now is what you would need, like, to start working on the compliance report. So I would say after the call or after this meeting, go into your account and see if you have that tab that was set administration.
Okay.
That way, if you have that tab, you're ready to start going and start working.
Okay, so I don't need any special password or anything like that. I can just use my email and log in.
Yep, it's the same
Okay.
login information that,
Okay.
yes, when you created the account. Now you just were given extra rights into the system.
Oh, okay. All right. That was my question. Sorry, I probably wasn't clear about that. Thank you.
No, you're fine.
Hi, April. Hey, this is Ryder. For the Providence Church, anyone that tries to finish the requirement, when they go to save it, it wasn't saving. It did it to me. It did it to a couple of us. I think one of them contacted you and it still couldn't. I don't know what happened to that.
Okay.
So we're wondering why we can't save it.
Like maybe process it? Like, are you guys at the background check section?
Yes. No,
Okay.
you finish it. You do the background check and you do everything, and then when you're going to finish it, it wouldn't save it for you to finish.
Okay, so that's a great one right here. Let me just make it a little bit. Oh, it's not going to get bigger. Here where it says Adventist support at Sterling Volunteers, I go ahead and start including them and just saying, this is where we are. Errors happen in the system. Nothing to the level, like no information has ever been given out, nothing like that. But like what you're talking about, hey, this background check is not being submitted. Even the other day, I did this whole process again, so I would come into this training and be really refreshed, because it happens every 3 years. I did the whole process again, and even my background check, I had to email in and say, hey, it's not processing, it's not accepting my driver's license number. And so this is who I would have reached out to, is Adventist support at Sterling Volunteers. Let them know what's going on. When there's multiple people, please include me, because we're seeing like a large pattern. Then it's not like just a one-off account. If there's 4 or 5 people, list that in the email and CC me, so that way I can keep monitoring it as well. So that way, there's been times where there's been a problem with the Spanish segment, which wasn't happening on the English one. And so then we can say, hey, we need to focus our time. There's something in the system where when someone is selecting the Spanish training, you know, this problem is happening. So with this level of volunteers having an issue, just CC me so that way I can kind of just follow and make sure that you guys are getting the support and that we're not just fixing these few accounts, but we're looking at the larger issue of, hey, we don't want this to happen to another church.
Thank you.
Hi, April.
Hey, thanks so much.
Hi, April. My name is Barbara, and my issue is something close to that, but I think more. I have like 21 persons who they have signed up. Some of them, but they're not in compliance, not eligible. Some of them, they just cannot go back to their background check. Some of them just cannot go back to the training. They're signing, but it's not giving chance to get any of those done. When you pull up a minute ago, I saw where you have that red thing right there. That's what it looked like. Some of them will say BGC, and the others will say training and BCG, but it's not giving them the option to go back and do it. How can we solve this? Or better, yes, how can I solve it? Or better, yes, how can you solve this issue?
This one. This one.
Yeah. So I would have the same information. I would use that customer support, and when there's multiple people, lists like in one email. If there are 10 people going through it, then list the 10 people, the name and what they're encountering. This person doesn't have the training accessible to them, and keep it in the group email. So that way we can track when it's like more than one person. If it's just like one person, you don't have to worry about CCing me. But when it's a group of people, we want to make sure that that experience isn't going to happen to another church that's going through it. So let me just go over to the compliance report. I'm not going to pull up live information. I'm just going to pull up the demo account. Oh, yeah, sorry. So it sounds like you're encountering where people are not listed.
Yes, right. Yeah, it's something like that. Yes.
So let me show you something just as we're in here. So I'm going to pull up, this is the one I did the last few days, so I would have information in the website. When you click on my name, you can click on background check. So why on the compliance report was I not shown as going through? But when you come into my details, then you can see a little bit more. So for me, I actually did the background check again. It's just I did it on the 10th and it's the 12th. It's the weekend. So the results haven't come back. So for this reason, I'm on the compliance report as ineligible, or, you know, you don't see me with the marking for being eligible.
So that's totally different from what I'm talking about. The thing is, some of them just signed in and they didn't even do the training at all because they just signed up. Because what happened, what we do with what I do, we do it, the training as a body on the big screen with everybody, every adult in church sitting there, and we all do the training. All right, going through, then person will go through their phone and follow what we are doing on this. You see what I'm saying? But when some of them that does not go through the phone, they went back now to their phone to say they had something doing. They went back to their phone and tried to do the training by themselves. They can't access it. So that's the issue. So they can't move from one spot to the next.
Okay, so for that one, call me tomorrow. My guess is sometimes when someone goes in and starts to create an account and they don't finish it all the way, their account is there, but it's kind of like in limbo because it hasn't been assigned to a location or a role. And so it gets lost where you can't even find it. And so it would take me to go in and find it and assign it. So call me tomorrow, have the list of names and kind of what we're going to be looking through. All right. And then we'll take it from there. And if it's a customer support one where I'll just say, oh, no, Barbara, these are all, you're going to have to work with customer support, or if I can fix it, then I'll fix it there. So
okay, how do I get a number for you to call you?
Yeah, I love the idea of doing the group trainings because sometimes you have to sit one-on-one with a person and have to do the trainings multiple times. What you did was great, getting everyone together either with laptops or on their phone, and then you guys engage in the training together. So it cuts down the amount of times you have to sit down with a person. Let me just see right here if my information is right on the website. Do you see that?
It's so small for me to see. I'll find it. I'll find it. I'll definitely. Okay, I'm just gonna take a screenshot with my phone. Thank you. Got it.
April,
So
this
when you
is
go to the
Janet.
website, it won't be small for you. I mean, you're seeing this on my screen, but why I came to the website is so that you will always feel like you can also go to the website and receive the same information. Then you won't have to, it is pretty small. I tried to make it larger, and no matter how much I try to zoom it, it's not changing. So, but if you go to the website, you'll be able to pull up the number and see it a little bit easier.
I screenshot it. I have it. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. All right.
April, I have a question.
Okay.
Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, I have a question. What about the members who have been members for years, the whole many posts in the church, but they don't want to do the child protection training. They don't want to be a part of it. They say, no, just keep me out and stuff like that. So that has been going on for many years. How do we approach those people in regards to encouraging them to do this?
The best thing I could say is you have to start with your church board. And again, when we educate groups of people, it's so much easier to have them be
They are
rallying.
in the board, April. They are board members.
Okay, then at that point, so after the education, and if they are saying they will not comply, and this was with the pastor present and they're still not compliance, then you have to work with our conference, and we have to maybe come in and just work with the congregation a little bit, work with the church board. So hopefully they can see the importance. We can kind of show them some of the stats and show them why we're doing this. And there's several reasons why someone might feel uncomfortable. Some might just be a lack of education. Some might be they might not have a social security number. That comes up quite often, and they have to feel safe that the information that they're inputting in our system is okay. But just because they've been doing it for years and getting away with it, that's not right. It's wrong, and so it's going to take some leaderships, pastor support, conference support, your support, and just working all together in order to, it sounds like, get the congregation into a better footing. Yeah, so there's not a solution for today, but I would just say, speak with your pastor first. They're not in compliance, and so they shouldn't be serving.
Thank you.
Did I hear before Janet, was there a question from Janet?
Yes, April, did you say which form has been updated? We already voted a child protection policy, but you're saying that the conference has updated it?
No, that
Okay.
one's fine. Yeah, if you have
that's-
done the child protection policy, you're fine. And you're even fine to review what I was saying has been updated. I'll probably even keep the one that is from the NAD. The church participation agreement is for offenders, and it's the expectations that they will have to meet in order to even have the discussion. Can you even come to the church? So the church church child protection plan, that remains the same. So you've done it, you can cross it off your list, you've done it. And it's just when you get into the discussion of offenders that we have to start using a church participation agreement.
Okay, and then you said the volunteers don't have to fill out that special volunteer form? Just
Correct.
do the compliant, just do the training?
Yeah,
Is
I
that-
think we've taken it off of our website. So now everything is housed in amateur screening verification. So you don't have to collect forms anymore. And if you've already done the form, because it's such a new process, don't worry about it until the next cycle when they would renew in order to collect the references on the website.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Hi, April. My problem is I tried to sign in on the page like few months ago. And the problem is anytime I try to sign in, the system tells me that I have more than one account and I should call the number that they give on the screen. I've tried calling the number and it's like nobody is responding. So I don't know how to go about again in the system.
Okay. I do see you have 2 accounts. I've stopped screen share, so it's just something that I can.
Oh, okay.
So I'm not trying to show your personal information. Yeah, you do have. Let me just see if I can fix her right now.
Okay.
Okay. I'm gonna keep the one that has. Okay. So I've combined your accounts into one. Now, right now, I don't show you that you have local admin rights. I just have to go to my forms. Catherine, you've been
I'm not sure if you ever sent me because I remember I requested the form so that my pastor can sign it, but I never got the form. So if you can maybe send it to me.
Yeah, it's also right here. I'm gonna send you right here.
Okay.
Let me share screen again so you can see where we have it. So back on our conference website in child protection, there is a section at the very bottom that says church coordinator. And then it just says the directions. You've done the training today, so you don't have to worry about, we've done that. So check that off. But then here it says coordinator designation form.
Okay.
So that's the form that you need to have filled out. And then I will send you though, just in case your login. Do you want me to reset your password?
Yes, please.
Okay. So after, I'm going to email you with your user ID and just a temporary password so you can at least get into the account, okay? And then follow up by going to the website and just grabbing that form.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Hi, April. I would like to know when will the video or the recording be available?
Yeah, for here, it is being recorded. One thing I didn't like as I was watching, do you see how this little panel, there's like a box. So as it was going through and the majority have the boxes, I was thinking, how can I even re-record this so it's cleaner? So I'm gonna think about that this week as if I can get a cleaner version for you guys. I mean, it's easy for us to have the recording and send it off, but I'd love to get a better version. The presentations that like the PowerPoint, I can send that to you immediately, but I'd love to do a re-record and just clean it up a little bit.
Thank you.
Yeah. Is there a particular area that like I could definitely also reference how you can access Mike's presentation as well? That one would be pretty quick because that's already recorded. But if there's a particular area, I can start on that one first.
Well, it's for officers that were not able to make it today, so that they could do it on when they return back from vacation.
Okay. So you're
Yeah.
looking for a good, just overall training.
Yeah, overall training, exactly.
Okay, great. Even on our website, right here is the SNEC child protection training video. There's one here as well, just so that way it's taped and you can hit the ground running. And that one will give an overall presentation. But if you're looking for, because we really hit on predators today, and it was very focused
Yes.
in on that. If you're
Yes.
looking more for that direction, then again, I could even give this recording, but again, I just like to make it a little bit cleaner.
Sure, no problem.
So yeah, just
So,
follow up.
so will it be posted on the church, the conference website?
Yeah, I can have it posted on the website. We'll do officer training. Sure.
Oh, okay, sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, Sister April, if we have the training for a church, uh, we don't have an expert there. They're just looking at the video training. How do we answer questions when the questions come up?
Well, a lot of the questions will probably be addressed in the trainings, but you know, you can certainly, you know, ask our team, you know, there can be follow-up if you don't have the answer. Hey, I need to get back to you on that question. I think that's always the best thing. Of course, you'll probably have your pastor there. There's times where maybe even the conference will be represented there. You know, if I'm out there for a training, I can certainly, you know, help. So, I mean, when you don't have the answer, I would just say we need to get back to you on that, and we need to follow up with the conference, or maybe there's even someone specific, if it's you know, social worker or mental health counselor. So I'd answer what you can. The material probably will answer a lot of the questions. A lot of people have questions that they want to ask before like getting through the whole maybe training. And so sometimes the training itself, just making it to the end, will answer a lot of people's questions. So yeah, I would just say we can get back to you when we don't have the answer. I'll get back to you. I'll find that out. I'll ask April. I'll ask the pastor. We'll have to connect with a state agency. You know, we'll get to the resource that we need to get that information.
Okay, thank you very much. And then the slides that you gave us, are they available on the website? The slides?
I'll add that to the website. Yeah,
Okay.
the presentations we went through today, I can definitely add to the website.
All right, thank you. Take care.
Thank you, too.
Hi, April. I'm Christina. I have a question.
Okay.
About this training, the child protection, we need to take it again or no? You know, that yesterday somebody talking to my church, this training said no, this not good for the church. Okay, we need to take other one. How do you explain to me, please? Because I don't understand.
So, you know, there is a basic training that everyone has to go through, and that's with the Adventist screening verification. So every volunteer has to go through that basic training, and this wouldn't have supplemented it. What this did was provide training at the like coordinator level, which gives you like more in-depth. So what's happening within the church, within, you know, in relation to this. And so this was trying to train you in your role, in your managing role, versus it's not trying to give like a base child protection training that would come from the Adventist screening verification module. But here was to train leaders.
Okay, she give it the link, but nobody, I can't go. Everybody, we have problem for connected to the link.
Okay, so on the website, if you're seeing here, I think I have it shared. If you come just to the conference, and when you're in the conference website, you come to child protection. It's going to bring you to this page, and I try to put all the information. So have your volunteers come down, and there's going to be a whole volunteer section. Christina, are you with a Spanish church?
Yeah.
Okay. So let me log out. When people are creating their account, once they're here, they can do first time registering. But if they would prefer to have the process in Spanish, then they should select this instead, the Espanol.
Okay.
Okay. But if they're fine with English, they can click this one. If not, go ahead and encourage them to use this one. But this link is up and running. And if people, I know it's a funny website, so that's why I kind of always lead people to our conference and link over. So again, if you come over to our conference website, it's going to have that information and link right there for them. I list it out completely, ncsrisk.org.amatus, or if they just want to click on it, it'll bring them over and then they can do it in English or in Spanish.
Okay, you want to send this link for me for my email, please?
Oh, sure. Do you want me to do the conference one, or do you want me to do the direct link?
The conference. Maybe I try for
the conference one.
Yeah,
Okay.
maybe the conference is fine.
Okay, I'm gonna send it right now. See, Christina. See if it populates right off. It doesn't. Can you give me your email address?
FC Ferreira. Yeah, FC Ferreira. 65. .com gmail.com.
So FC Ferreira, FERRERIA
Yeah.
65 at gmail.com.
Yeah.
Okay. For volunteers. All right. Done. It is going to as we speak, Christina. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. No problem.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Any other questions? I'd start going to the chat, but I think we're kind of
I'm
it's online that maybe send something in.
I check for the receipt. Let me see.
Let me see. I think that bounced back to me. So I'm gonna. Oh. I think that email bounced back to me. So
Okay. It's F the Frank.
Okay, hold on a second. Let me go back to the message. Yes, F as in Frank.
Yeah. C de Charlie.
Ella entiende español, Cristina.
Okay. F de Frank. C de casa. Ferreira. FERREIRA @gmail.com.
Okay, I had an I in there, so I think I have it now. FC.
Yeah.
FERRERA.
Yeah.
Okay, I had it spelled wrong earlier. Okay, so I'm gonna send it now. Let's see if you get it now. Okay, and this one doesn't look like it came back. So I think it probably made it to you this time.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, I'll just leave one more minute if there's questions, and then if not, I will wish you guys a good afternoon.
April, can I ask a question?
Of course.
Oh, this is Janet. I have, the form that was supposed to be returned to the conference that the clerk has to complete. We haven't gotten that done. And it looks like there's only certain offices that you're requesting, the church board offices on that form.
Right. The church officer update isn't going to be like a complete volunteer listing. And it's just supposed to be one more way that we check the list, but that's not a complete listing of all of the volunteers that you are going to be working with. You know, I'm sure there'll be support staff in Sabbath schools and so forth. So you'll have more people that you're checking, Janet. It's just for the officer update, you know, they are just collecting like some of the key leaders within the church. And so since they're already collecting the information, we just said, let's add on this process to make sure that what will be listed is checked. But that's not saying, hey, this is all the volunteers in the church. That's just
So I don't hold up the form then for every volunteer and every member to get trained.
well, a general member wouldn't have to. If they're not serving, they don't have to do the process. You can fill
Right.
in the officer update form and sign off that the officers have gone through.
Okay.
Same way as if you were doing an adventure or pathfinder form, you'd be signing off on those specific people that you're listing in the clubs. So those ones are just specific to certain areas. But you yourself know that you're in charge of all of the volunteers and you'll be checking everyone and reporting each month, you know, for your, did they include your office in the church board meetings?
You mean
Do
the
you,
child protection?
yeah,
As the
do you
child
attend?
protection, well, yes, the child protection leader and the clerk are in our board meetings.
So I would say that's the place to continually address all of the volunteers. And the reports that you were mentioning are just really just a segment of the volunteers. But each month you can have that list. Here we are with all of our volunteers and where they are, who's eligible, who's not yet done. And then it's just that
Okay.
constant reminder. And it's also then hopefully getting support from, you know, the board. So if it's the head elder and there's two elders underneath that person, they can say, hey, what last month my two people weren't done and they're still not done. Okay, I need to step in and start helping, you know, and I would solicit that and say, hey, I need your support for the head leaders. Pathfinder leaders, I need your support. You see, you only have 5 people of the 10 that are done. And I'm
Okay.
going to initiate it with them and I'm going to have that conversation, but I need your help too.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for being with us, for staying on, and just if you had questions, thanks for staying on and participating in that. And of course, you can follow up with me and send me an email or call. I've been out, so I know for the next week, it's probably going to be a lot of catch up on what's taking place. But of course, call or email in with any questions that you guys have. And I appreciate all the work that you do to serve so faithfully. So God bless you.